We're live.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Open Classroom, Queer Justice Now, Challenges Pinkwashing, White Supremacist, Zionist, and Islamophobic Narratives. I'd like to begin this webinar acknowledging that San Francisco State University is built on indigenous Ohlone people's stolen lands. And we'd like to remember the history of resistance against settler colonialism throughout our webinar today. And thank you for everyone for joining us today. While there are so many struggles and resistances all over, and in the midst of it, you are presenting so much for us, and we are looking forward to sharing this space with you for the next couple of hours. This Open Classroom is a collaboration between Professor Rabab Abdulhadi, Director and Senior Scholar of the Arab and Muslim Ethnicities and Diaspora Studies at San Francisco State University, and myself, Lecturer in Women and Gender Studies at SFSU. It's been a great honor and privilege to be able to work with Professor Abdulhadi and through her immensely influential publications and activism. Professor Abdulhadi has guided Palestine, Arab American, and transnational feminist practices over decades and taught us what the indivisibility of justice truly means. And she has guided and mentored many of us here today, and many of us shaped our scholarship on the shoulder of her definitive scholarship over decades. We also have a panel of the most distinguished scholars and leaders in queer theory here, and we'd like to introduce them as we make in the program. So, Dr. Abdulhadi, would you like to jump in?
Yes, I would like to also again echo my colleague Tomomi Kinukawa to welcome everybody here and to acknowledge that we are on a stolen indigenous Ohlone people's land. We are very excited to have everybody here. It's been kind of like a few hiccups that we're going to talk about getting this webinar together. As some of you know, this is actually a two-part series project on gender and sexual justice in Arab and Muslim communities. We have had the first webinar this semester on September 23rd. That was called Whose Narratives? Gender, Justice and Resistance, a conversation with Leila Khaled. As you know, it was silenced, censored by Zoom first, and then it was censored by Facebook and by YouTube, who shut us down. We tried, the team who was here, we tried to actually go to other platforms, and we were silenced. As a result of that, we were not able to bring it on board. We've also had multiple problems by our own university in the sense of trying to get the names of the people who were registered for the first one. We had over 1,500 people registered on Zoom, as well as I think it was maybe 4,000 people on Facebook, to reach people to tell them this is what we're doing for the second webinar. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to get that. So today is a volunteer effort. We're working on it. We're trying to make it happen. We are very excited that we have unbelievable, amazing scholars, activists, public intellectuals who are joining us today. The purpose of the two webinars is to actually think about how do we think about feminist justice and how do we think about queer justice? How do we bring the two together? And why are they so important for what we talk about the indivisibility of justice, that we cannot speak about justice for anybody unless we speak about justice for all. And so this is building on the two webinars we also had in the spring 2020, right after COVID-19 hit, and where almost everybody started using online virtual communication in order to connect with each other. So I'm going to pass it over to Professor Kinukawa to talk a little bit about our history and how we began, and then we're going to go back and forth. We're trying to do it very organic and engage the amazing public intellectual scholars and activists who are joining us, including two amazing feminists and queer activists from Palestine, where it is now 10:30 at night. So this is actually quite late. So thank you so much for joining us. And everybody else who is, which we're going to go over it. We're going to have first speak Ghadir, Shafie, and Haneen Haneen Maikey. Then after we hear a performance by this amazing Lebanese activist, feminist, scholar, queer Leila Farah. Then we are going to go into the conversation with the other panelists, Dr. Judith Butler, Dr. Beverly Guy-Sheftall, Emmeia Gelman, student Dr. Dean Spade, and Dr. Heike Schotten, and then we will open it up for discussion. So please hold your questions right in the comment section, and we will get to you as soon as possible. Again, we're very, very excited, and I'm going to pass it back to my colleague, Tomomi, Professor Kinukawa, for Women and Gender Studies at San Francisco State.
Thank you. So I'd like to just briefly describe how we started this collaboration. And so, I teach introductory women and gender studies course at SFSU over 5 years or so, and naturally I've included Dr. Abdulhadi's scholarship, publication many times in my classes to learn about Palestine Arab American feminism and also transnational feminism. And so this was my idea actually to invite her to my classes, and then Dr. Abdulhadi graciously agreed. And then in spring 2020, as Dr. Abdulhadi told us, we planned two webinars, like one about Palestine, feminism and militant feminism, and then militancy. I'm sorry, and then the second one, queer justice. So the first one, in the first webinar, we started with learning from Dr. Abdulhadi's scholarship on Palestine feminism and militancy, and through illustrating how deeply Leila Khaled's revolutionary work is rooted in Palestinian women's resistance under the brutal colonial occupation, Dr. Abdulhadi squarely challenges the Zionist colonial Islamophobic distortion of life and work of the feminist icon, and demanded us to redefine what constitutes feminism. And that was the first webinar. And then we continue to discuss queer justice, and learning about actually the history of many of the panelists here, like how you actually collaborated each other over the years, including Dr. Abdulhadi, of course. And then we got, after the two seminars, we got like overwhelmingly positive feedback from our students, and they all were feeling, they wrote they wrote very strong responses, saying like how indignated they felt like by the fact that they had never had a chance to learn about Palestine, the Israel sexual colonialism, and the U.S. sexual colonialism in relation to that, and so forth. And so based on that success, and then they really students appreciated the kind of the huge epistemic transformation that they were that was incited by the webinars. And so based on that, we decided to actually repeat the two open classrooms this semester. But this, back then in spring, we were not able to have guest speakers due to transition because of the pandemic. But then this semester, over the summer, Dr. Abdulhadi and the team of four of us reached out to all of you guest speakers, and we're able to have these webinars. Would you like to? You have to unmute, Dr. Abdulhadi.
Yes. Hi. I don't know why it keeps muting me. I think that we can be a little bit ahead of time and move on to basically bring in our first participant, and I think you are going to be introducing my dear colleague and friend and sister comrade Leila Farah, whom we've known and struggled with in the National Women's Studies Association, in many other format, on the street, in the classroom, and so on. So I'm going to pass it on to you, Professor Kinukawa, so you can introduce Dr. Farah, and then we will be engaging back and forth. And then I will be introducing Ghadir and Haneen, and so we're going through the discussion. So please back to you.
Okay, so it's a great honor to introduce you, Dr. Leila Farah. Dr. Farah attended Lebanese American University and Eastern Michigan University while working toward her BA in Theater and Communication Arts and her MA in Performance Studies and Communication. She received her doctorate in Performance Studies from Southern Illinois University. She's currently an associate professor in women's and gender studies at DePaul University and working on future performance pieces in Chicago, nationally and internationally, as well as touring with her latest production of Weaving the Maps, based on refugee women's narratives from Syria, Iraq, and Palestine. She has performed 2 previous one-woman shows nationally and internationally, entitled Shaping the World with Our Hands, and also Living in the Hyphen Nation. Her research interests include research with and the performance of third world women, in quotation marks, third world women and women of color, post-colonial identities, and again, alienation, and ethnographic and autoethnographic performance. She is dedicated to her activism towards social justice with an emphasis on gender justice and anti-racist and anti-imperialist and anti-settler colonial oppression. So thank you so much, Dr. Farah, for being here with us.
Thank you for the introduction, and it's so good to see other people's faces. Excuse me. So I'm a little worse for wear, but I'm going to do my best to share some pieces with you that I have included in the latest production, which, by the way, is co-created, and all the other ethnographies besides the one I'm going to share with you today by Dr. Aziz Nasser from Denison University, also fierce Palestinian and feminist activist, and dear friend and comrade. So I'm going to share with you two poems, 2 sections of what there's sort of these breaks in the show, what we call movements. So the show is in 4 movements, and I'm going to just share those sort of introductory movements and interspersed, as I usually do, with poetry. So the first poetry piece is Amir Aziz from New Delhi, and the second is anonymous, called Kintsukuroi, and I will explain more about that after. So, okay, so here it goes. How does an Orientalist use the veil? How are you veiled? Who's pulling the veil over your eyes? What does unveiling mean? What does it look like? To who, where, in what spaces? Whose colonial fantasies get tickled and excited? How is the veil politicized? Everything will be remembered. Kill us. We will become ghosts and write of your killings. With all the evidence, you write jokes in court. We will write justice on the walls. We will speak so loudly that even the deaf will hear. We will write so clearly that even the blind will read. You write injustice into the earth. We will write revolution into the sky. Movement 2. Bodies are sites of violence. What is written on your body? In the crevasses, in the veins, behind the ears? What secret cartographies are etched on the skin, under the skin? When we reach the barbed wire and the checkpoints of armed forces, do we hide these maps? What do we do with them? Sometimes triggered, but our bodies are unblemished. What about the invisible scars? The ones we cannot even talk about? What baggage do we carry besides that which is on our backs and in our arms? Whose dark diplomacy is etched on our brow? And how do we drape the latest anti-refugee rhetoric over our shoulders, feeling at home under the secrets that we hide between our legs, between our lips, between our ears? I think that the lines on our face tell the story. Azza Abu Rabia, Syria. I have been on a surreal journey through the Syrian war. I was detained because of my art and my activism. My artwork at the very beginning of Syria's uprising in 2011 held up a mirror to the Syrian society in turmoil. I risked arrest by painting graffiti and murals about the protest movement. And after struggling with the security forces and their cracking down, I helped to smuggle food and medicine to people displaced in the fighting, even as the opposition was taking up arms. Soon I found myself imprisoned with women who were mostly arrested at random. And then my art became a mirror for my fellow prisoners, drawing them so they could see themselves. I drew them in all shades of black and white, their grimacing faces and thin limbs, after my favorite artist, Goya. After my arrest, I spent 70 days crammed into a small, filthy cell with 15 other women. And they went on a hunger strike, demanding only that their families be told where they were. Some even refused their medicine, risking death from heart attack and epilepsy, and I don't know. So when a guard shouted at them, and I yelled back at him, "What would you do if your daughter disappeared and you knew nothing about her for 60 days, huh?" So the conditions improved when I went to Adra in an official prison, where I was finally able to persuade the guards to bring me paper and pencil and to begin drawing. The drawings I made of the women made them see how they look. They are much more beautiful than the way I drew them. I feel very guilty because I left and they are still there. But when I saw a psychologist, she encouraged me to draw everything. And at first I felt very blocked, but after a while, the work started to flood out of me. So there was a big series of etches from my prison experience, and I continue to create art about women that I met in detention. Here in my living room, the small room here, my prison art hangs on the wall with string made from blankets that were falling apart and olive pits. They're little people. And I remember the women every day. Kintsukuroi, the art of repairing with gold. What beauty is breaking, spirit's vessel shattering, fragility confirmed, fracture lines map tectonics of damage, a jigsaw of breaking laid bare. And yet, rivulets of healing still gleam through the shards, a geography of mending as breath. That uneven melody, haunted by broken notes, rises, splintered, striving to song. These are my war tales. I wear earrings made of shrapnel. I am bulletproof with a nuclear tongue. Come closer. This is your last concentration camp. Done.
Thank you, Leila. I was waiting to let the pause stick in there. Thank you so much. This has been, sometimes there are no words to say afterwards. I'm going to continue, and we also really we're very appreciative of the fact that you are with us, even though you actually hurt your foot. So this is really great. We wish you speedy recovery. It's amazing what you have given us. So we thank you. We wish you a speedy recovery, and we will be able to have a discussion. I really just want the words to sit there and for people to listen. The next speakers, and please hold your questions, everybody, so we will be able to have a discussion later on. The next participants, there is two participants who are going to be speaking very dear to my heart also, who are joining us from Palestine. The first is Ghadir Shafie, who is co-founder and director of Aswat, Palestinian Feminist Center for Sexual and Gender Freedom. Ghadir is a feminist queer activist who passionately believes in the intersectionality of the struggle of Palestinian queer women fighting a triple oppression as Palestinians in the context of Israel's system of apartheid, military occupation, and settler colonialism, as women in imperialist male-dominated society, and as queers in the context of pinkwashing and homophobia. Ghadir dedicates her work and activism to promoting a greater understanding of and support for sexual and gender freedoms within Palestine, and to advocating intersectional solidarity with Palestine in the global feminist and queer movements. Her interviews and articles appear in various academic and media outlets, Arab and international. I'm going to pass it on. The next will be also Haneen Maikey. I'm going to pass it on to Ghadir. I will just say that we were actually very excited when we were able to engage with Ghadir and spend time in Akka in 2018 during the Teaching Palestine Pedagogical practice and indivisibility of justice tour. Also, Ghadir was very active to get together a statement, feminist statement, after Zionist Israelis came out with attacking the National Women's Studies Association for passing the position on justice in Palestine. But I also met Ghadir and Haneen and Guy, who was another queer comrade of ours, back in 2010, I believe, when many of us organized a national tour in the US. And we hosted you at San Francisco State University. So it's really our pleasure to have both of you. We tried to also get Ghaib. They were not available today, but we're really, really excited. We're so excited to have you speak to us and share your experiences and with our colleagues, with our students, with our public. So I'm going to pass it over to you, Ghadir, and I'm going to say that everybody's going to, we've asked everybody to speak for 10 minutes. Of course, that's not enough because we have so much more we want to hear from you, but we're trying to make it as sort of appetizer. And then we will be able to come back and have more discussion later on. And also hope more people will be hosting you and hearing from you. So Ghadir, back to you. Please, welcome. You're muted.
Can you hear me now? Hello?
Yes,
Yes, we can.
Yes, okay. Just give me a signal or speak out if you can't hear me. So thank you so much, Rabab. Thank you so much for organizing this, what it seems to be a global event, bringing voices from and for Palestinians in our collective efforts to bring justice to all Palestinians. And thank you so much, Rabab, for including me in this distinguished group of speakers. In the next few minutes, I will share some of my insights on how our grassroots organizing, our queer movement in Palestine has been affected both nationally and globally. Let me start by saying that it is always challenging to try and recall how our movements were born and how our own activism is not only inspired, but also empowered by those who came before us, those who have joined us, and those who are marching ahead of us. In trying to historize the queer movement in Palestine, it is imperative, in my opinion, to contextualize the intersection of queer politics and feminism, as the feminist movement has always been strategically and organically connected to connected to national and social struggles, meaning to a great extent, women's rights within Palestinian society are a mainstream issue. Despite constant efforts to marginalize women's voices and minimize their immense contribution to the struggle for justice and freedom, our institutional memory, our heritage, are those of a feminist movement that has always actively involved in political, social, and national organizing, ultimately connecting struggles with a society that has been resisting occupation, settler colonialism, apartheid, Zionism, and sexism for almost 100 years. In establishing Aswat, queer and historical Palestine, enriched broad section to include gender and sexual rights and freedoms. In doing so, Aswat has placed a special emphasis on the intersectionality of our struggles as Palestinians, as women, and as queers, uniting feminism, queerism, and resistance to all forms of oppression into a monumental struggle that has become not only relevant, but also effective locally and globally. In the past 2 decades or so, Aswat, Al-Qaws, and many other feminist and human rights activists, groups, and institutions have worked independently and collectively to center and make visible the rights and freedom of queer Palestinians. As queer groups, we have created and sustained programs and initiatives to provide support and empowerment to our geographically fragmented community, developed training courses and conducted research to increase public awareness, engagement, and responsibility, produce knowledge, art, and narratives of, by, and for queers, and work to establish a movement that does not quietly adhere to social and political constraints and taboos. And though we still have to grow, learn, and improve, we have come a long way. In the past year or so, Palestinian society have been in turmoil. Some have stimulated the birth of new radical feminist organizing, like Tal'at, a feminist movement that took to the streets in massive marches, fiercely stepping out, as its name suggests, against gender-based violence in all its manifestations: femicide, domestic violence, sexism, and violence against queers. Other events have directly affected the discourse on queer issues, like the Palestinian-owned Tahina company's donation to a Zionist LGBT organization based in Tel Aviv. This has increased awareness of pinkwashing and how it's mobilized to further the oppression of Palestinian queers. We've also seen the vote of the Arab Joint Party on the conversion therapy law and incidents of violence against queer bodies, along with several other significant events in the history of our queer movement that have created opportunities to break some of the prevailing taboos around sexual and gender rights and force people to step out against gender-based violence and engage in open and sincere public debates on sexual and gender freedoms, offering a fertile ground for awareness raising and opportunities for real change, and moving the issue from the margins to the center of the discussion within Palestinian society. This has been a historic moment for all of us. Challenges often present real opportunities for change. The queer movement in Palestine has gained legitimacy and visibility and become effective nationally due to our insistence and commitment to intersectional discourse and narratives. How did we become effective globally? By joining efforts with the Palestinian Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions Movement, BDS. People ask, why BDS? My answer is, why not? Being active in BDS is ethical. It is principled, smart, practical, and effective. While BDS is Palestinian-led, it is a vibrant global movement made up of trade unions, academic institutions and associations, and grassroots organizations across the world. Since its launch in 2005, BDS has dramatically challenged international support for Israeli apartheid and settler colonialism. BDS intersects with indigenous movements like the Black Justice Movement in South Africa and later Black Lives Matter in the US. We all remember the first Black Solidarity Statement with Palestine, signed in 2015 by major activists, artists, scholars, students, and organizations, joining and strengthening the struggle between our movements. Palestinian queers have been crucial to the success of this global movement, especially in bringing more attention to Palestine within the global queer community and creating links of solidarity and soliciting the support of queer groups in the fight against Israel's constant attempt to pinkwash its crimes against all Palestinians. We saw how effective queer groups around the world are in the Eurovision Song Contest that took place in Tel Aviv in 2019, when more than 100 queer groups signed petitions to boycott Eurovision in apartheid state. While our vigorous efforts did not result in the cancellation of Eurovision in Tel Aviv, It did result in a massive boycott of the contest. And while Israel was expecting 50,000 visitors, it ended up with a mere 5,000. Most rewarding was the hashtag apartheid, which was the second most popular hashtag related to the event after Eurovision. BDS centers queer voices, nationally and globally. And queer Palestinians amplify the voices of the marginalized, the oppressed, the occupied, the displaced, the alienated, the persecuted, the besieged, whether in Gaza or in their own homes, the imprisoned. Speaking on behalf of those who have no voice, in doing so, we hope to bring justice and freedom to all Palestinians. Thank you so much for your effort to bring justice to us. Thank you very much.
I'm supposed to unmute myself. Thank you so much, Ghadir, and we will get back to discussions with you. It is also, and you mentioned a lot of things. Can we? Oh yeah, we. I'm have also a Facebook which is lagging behind. So, we're going to be having more of discussions and many of the topics. It is next. It is my pleasure to introduce also my comrade, my sister, my colleague, Haneen Maikey, who is a Palestinian queer community organizer based in Jerusalem. Haneen is the co-founder and director of Al-Qaws for Sexual and Gender Diversity in Palestinian Society, a Palestinian civil society organization founded in grassroots activism that works towards social change with regard to sexuality, sexual orientation, and gender and its intersections with the colonial context in Palestine. Haneen is the author of several articles about queer organizing in Palestine and pinkwashing, both in Arabic and English, and she's actually co-author with one of the people here on the panel, Heike. And also many of the articles are actually on our syllabi, so students will recognize that. Haneen has a bachelor's degree in social work with a specialization in community organizing and a master's degree in nonprofit and community organizations management. She holds a diploma in organizational development, a psychoanalysis, and open system approach. And I want to say that also we met back when there was the national tour, and then we continued communicating afterwards. Actually, Haneen, Al-Qaws, Aswat, many other queer Arab groups actually pushed out a statement very important to the US Social Forum in 2011, when Stand With Us tried to actually have a workshop on supposedly queer support in the region. Also, we worked very closely at the World Social Forum Free Palestine, where Haneen and others organized a Queer Visions for Palestine, a 2-day actually conference, at which also some of members of our delegation, Angela Davis and Gina Dent, participated. They've met Al-Qaws back in 2011, and Beverly is part of that delegation. When also Angela sometimes says that Judith Butler told her, you really have to go meet the queer Palestinian groups when you are in Palestine. But also the collaboration for me is very dear. Haneen spoke at San Francisco State, her lectures actually online, which is available for students and our syllabi for students to read. And also is the whole collaboration with the sexualities that was supposed to be summer school in 2014. But then the war on Gaza took place in 2014, and also I was denied the right to travel to Palestine to work with Haneen and amazing 40 Palestinian young people who were trying to devise a discourse on sexuality that's anti-colonial in Arabic. We finally met in Bethlehem in December 2014. There is a lot to say, so I'm not going to continue because there is so much. And then more recently was the ways in which also Al-Qaws has been very active in basically standing up to also tendencies in the Palestinian society that seeks to devise justice and say there is justice for Palestine, but not justice for gender and sexual justice. And it's my pleasure to introduce you, Haneen. We'll come back to more discussions. We've asked you both to address a whole bunch of issues, so we know you're not going to be addressing, or you're not going to have the time to address them all. But please just share with us what are the issues that you think are most important at this point to you, and we'll come back to you with the questions as well. So please.
Wow, thank you, Rabab. A lot of memories. I'm gonna use the excuse that I'm tired and it's almost like 11 p.m. to allow myself to have some kind of remarks, but not in an organized way. And probably it's really good that Ghadir gave this some kind of a historical review to the queer movement in Palestine, and somehow also anti-pinkwashing and the activism around pinkwashing. I want to basically use also the opportunity that today Al-Qaws, the organization I grew up in and I'm part of, just launched a new analysis paper about anti-pinkwashing activism and anti-pinkwashing analysis. And basically, and maybe this event, this conversation is really a good opportunity. It's an invitation for different activists and movement to move beyond propaganda and move beyond only BDS campaigning to tackle pinkwashing, and somehow to rethink our analysis and strategies, centering queer voices and queer Palestinian experiences, and how pinkwashing actually operates as a colonial strategies that harming mainly queer Palestinians and Palestinian society in general. And maybe just to jump a couple of years ago, and Rabab and Ghadir and others, I'm sure you will mention a lot of really milestones in this conversation about what is pinkwashing, what is solidarity with Palestine, what is the role of queer Palestinian movement in these discussions. We probably had a couple of phases with this joint exploration of this really intense kind of new, right, and clear the beginning of the movement, that we were all in a way centering solidarity with Palestine and international solidarity with Palestine. This is where all of the international speaking tour that Rabab mentioned happened. A lot of conversation about Palestine started to open among queer movement, and it was messy and it was unclear, and it was I think really interesting times to explore what we want as queer people around the globe that interested in Palestine and interested to bring queer lens to this question. And later on, the second stage, in my opinion, was more also the Ghadir mentioned, the move to BDS and centering our anti-pinkwashing activism around campaigning, very specific campaigning against, for instance, Tel Aviv Gay Pride, Tel Aviv Film Festival. And what I learned, and it was a team, an amazing actually labor that was put in, and a lot of friends here helped through the years with PACP and Al-Qaws. And from that, really experience of launching a lot of campaigns through the last decades and working with allies around the globe, and specifically in North America and Europe, whereas BDS is very central, we started to see how the conversation is shifting more toward outside, right? And centering in a way Israeli actions, or in that case, sometimes Israeli queers or Israeli artists or Israeli festivals or whatever it is, right? And on the other side, centering international allies, be it filmmakers or other activists that should support, withdraw, cancel, boycott these Israeli activities. And we used a lot the colonial context of Palestine in general. And with the decrease with anti-pinkwashing activism globally and also in Palestine and specifically in the last couple of years, we started to look inside in our local context, started to look on how queer youth are engaging with pinkwashing, how when we talk about pinkwashing and colonialism inside our queer Palestinian movement, the reaction, the experiences, how much people relate to it, how they understand it, specifically on their experience and generally the impact of it on Palestinian society. And I think the shift we are basically promoting in this paradigm of how we see pinkwashing and anti-pinkwashing started really from this careful listening and watching of how we basically as queer Palestinians also consume pinkwashing narratives and how pinkwashing strategies are impacting our own life. And I want to invite you all to go to our Facebook and our website and read the document and use it and discuss it. And also we would love to discuss it with you. But if I want to quickly mention three main things about this document, is basically saying that the common definition that was useful back then was useful because it was a propaganda defined as a propaganda campaign that works to manipulate international audience to think about Israel as a gay-friendly, gay haven, right? And Palestinian are backward. And while propaganda is while pinkwashing was used in these propaganda, when we started to look inside, we started to see that not only international audiences or LGBT queer groups around the globe are being impacted or recruited or being feeling empathy with the Zionist project because of their queer friendliness, right? But also queer Palestinians started to also internalize these narratives, right? The narratives about our society is homophobic, our families are unsafe, there is no future in Palestine, and really started to, while the colonial project is consistently work to destroy all of possibilities of lives and dignity for Palestinians, it's having another layer of telling specific group of Palestinians that they have no place in their own society because they are homophobic, they are backward, and of course there is no future or possibilities for change, right? And we see this internalized narratives working to further isolate queer Palestinians from their own society, push them to their colonizers that now is the only savior, the only one who could save you from own society. And I think this is a really interesting points that we should recenter in our anti-pinkwashing analysis. The second one, the second point I want to mention, and it's really crucial, the impact on Palestinian society, because the pinkwashing narrative, what it does is basically linking all the time queer Palestinians that historically we know the Palestinian queer movement is a radical anti-colonial movement, but in the anti-pinkwashing narrative is linking queer experience and LGBT experiences in Palestine to Israel, right? To their colonizer, and further in a way enforcing this colonial myth that Israel is their savior, right? And Palestinian society has one of the main forms of violence, social violence we face is this myth that Palestinian society consume on a daily basis, that queers are foreign and natural to this society, Israelized, westernized, coming from the outside. So pinkwashing narrative is working into reinforcing this myth by linking us and our pain and our experiences to Israel and the colonial project. And one last point, which is how pinkwashing operates also to erase the queer movement, and Ghadir would also probably share more later. But like in the pinkwashing narrative, there is no progressive voices or forces or anything that has any hope or future in Palestinian society. And in order for the pinkwashing narrative to thrive and survive and develop, and of course they are smart and they are planning and they're expanding and they're doing other things, the Palestinian queer movement does not exist, right? So this further pushes queer youth and queer LGBT into Israel and into colonial, like kind of a risky dynamic, because in this like narrative there is no al-Qaws, there is no aswad, there is no collective internal solidarity, there is no community support, there is no one cares about you, right? You are alone in front of your this monster that called society that looped everyone together, including the queer movement in Palestine. And you left out with only your colonizer that now is your only savior. And I want to stop here, and would love to continue the discussions. Before, I was like only briefly want to just like give some examples of like how we could reorient our like strategies and analysis into using the lens of colonialism, and start talking about pinkwashing as a symptom, as a tool, as an analysis, and go into the root of the problem, which is colonialism, and how Israel is using sexualized discourses to enforce their power on Palestine. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Haneen. Again, a lot of food for thought for every single person who already participated. I have tons of questions, but I'm going to hold them because I want to turn it over to my colleague, Tomomi Kinukawa, with whom I love collaborating. We'll talk about that. And Tomomi is going to be introducing our next set of amazing scholars, intellectuals, really organic intellectuals who are going to be joining us. So I'm turning it over to Tomomi. I'm going to hold off my questions for the time being. And welcome again.
Well, thank you so much. Yes, I'm holding my own. I'd like to express my appreciation, for everything that you all shared, and but then I think we'd like to move on with the program before we do the discussion. And so I'd like to introduce the panelists. And I think I would like to introduce all the panelists in the order that you're going to be speaking. And so first, our first speaker is Dr. Judith Butler, professor in comparative literature and critical theory at UC Berkeley. Judith Butler has published widely in the field of gender and queer studies, ethical and political philosophy, social justice, and activism. She's currently on the advisory board of Jewish Voice for Peace, and her books include Parting Ways, Jewishness, and a critique of Zionism, toward a performative theory of assembly, and the force of nonviolence. Yes, so I think I'm sorry, we didn't think about it, but should I introduce each presenter as they present? Okay, so Dr. Butler, thank you so much for being with us today. You're muted.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
I'm hoping I can be heard. All right. Well, first of all, I'm really pleased to be here, and it's good to see colleagues who don't live very far away, and also people I haven't seen in a very long time, sadly. Very sad for those of us who are not allowed in inside Palestine by the Israeli authorities, but much sadder for those of you who are living with those regulations and exclusions all the time. It's good to see Ghadir and Haneen. It's been some time. I guess I wanted to start just by acknowledging that it is important, the point that Haneen made, that the fight about pinkwashing very often ended up being about international queer scholars and international allies and what they felt comfortable saying or not saying. It ended up being about the state of Israel. Did it really include or exclude in the way that it was being said? It ended up being about almost everything except Palestinian lives. So that even when those of us were attacked for supporting BDS or criticizing pinkwashing, then the focus became on the international scholar or the international activist who spoke out and got criticized. And Palestinian lives seemed to vanish again and failed to be part of the story. I guess one thing I would like to say is that it is most important that Palestinians set the terms for the queer movement that most clearly and powerfully serves their communities, and that those of us who wish to be allies from the outside need to practice deep listening and to try to make ourselves not the center of that, because the media will make us the center, and the Israeli state will make us the center, and even the queer community internationally will go back to its usual ways of doing things. One of the things that Haneen taught me many years ago was that hypervisibility was generally accepted in the LGBTQ community as a norm that should be followed by everyone around the world. It was an imposition by urban elites in the United States and Europe, in Australia, who thought that the task of queer activism was to become more and more visible. And Haneen said to me then that very often the negotiation with visibility was something that queer Palestinians were doing all the time, and that they needed to set the terms of when and where to be visible and when and where not to. And also it was important for us on the outside who were living within that world of hypervisibility, unchallenged hypervisibility, to understand that there were ways of producing community support and networks of solidarity and bringing young queers in that depended on being able to move in and out of visibility, and that those networks didn't rely on hypervisibility in order to be successful. So now when I listen to Haneen, who always teaches me, I also hear that that she and Al-Kaus and others are trying to think about an effort to move beyond propaganda and to center Palestinian voices, which is also what Ghadir has said from the position of Aswat, that centering Palestinian voices in the critique of Zionism, the support for BDS, the critique of pinkwashing is all absolutely crucial. And that it is important that we don't just conduct this at an international level without looking at how the social media continues to efface Palestinians or the history of the Palestinian struggle. Because it's one thing for Angela Davis to represent it, and it's beautiful that she does. But it's another thing for it to become all about Angela Davis, right? Which she herself would not want. And it's also a struggle, right? Because on the one hand, there is still this pinkwashing notion where Israel says, look, there are Palestinians that are part of our government, our education, our legal profession. They are all over our world within 48. And what they mean to do with that is to show that there is an inclusion of some Palestinians within structures and within a state that is a racist state. So a racist state that includes Palestinians, how could it be so racist? Well, it is racist, and inclusion is not sufficient for a notion of freedom, for a notion of equality, or for a notion of justice. To be included in a racist regime is to be, at least potentially, and I know many people struggle with this, to be used as evidence that the regime is not racist. It also is a way for the racist regime to reproduce itself while showing, demonstrating, advertising its inclusiveness, right? They use terms like neoliberal terms like inclusiveness and equity. Well, equity comes from finance. Equity is like about liability and assets. Equity is not equality. Equality would be true equality. We are nowhere near true equality. And freedom can't be addressed through the notion of inclusion. We always have to ask, included in what, included as what, and for what purpose. So I do think that it's super important for all of us who try to work on this topic, to work with Palestinian queers, to find out how they are, how you are identifying the goals of your movement, and to work with you to find a language and a way of operating on and off the media, doesn't always have to be that, on and off the media, to produce another language, one that more properly, more poetically, more justly corresponds with the aspirations of the movement and its history and its accomplishment and its reality. Of course, queer has never just been an identity. It has always named an alliance, but it's always been an open question. How do we think about the alliance that is queer, right? What makes an alliance queer? And part of what makes an alliance queer, at least in my view, is that it's not just about gaining representations for one's identity in already existing structures. It's about using one's place and name and voice and presence to call for and enact radical change, including the overcoming of a racist regime, the thoroughgoing critique of Zionism, the defense of the right of Palestinians to return, however that may be interpreted, and support for the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement, which continues to be huge and very, very frightening for its enemies. Anyway, I'm honored to be queer with you. I hope to continue to be queer with you. I hope that we might engage more in conversations about what's useful and what's not useful for those in the international arena, or for Jewish anti-Zionists like myself. What's the useful role we might play going forward to make sure it's that the focus stays on Palestine in its sorrow, but Palestine in its accomplishment, its beauty, its work, its aspiration, and its future. So thank you for having me be in conversation with you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Butler. Again, there are so many thoughts and so many that your speech evokes in us. But I guess we'll wait until the end for the further discussion. And so I'd like to introduce next speaker. Next speaker is Dr. Beverly Guy-Sheftall. Dr. Sheftall is the founding director of the Women's Research and Resource Center and Anna Julia Cooper Professor of Women's Studies at Spelman College. For many years, she was a visiting professor at Emory University's Institute for Women's Studies, where she taught graduate courses in women's studies. At the age of 16, she entered Spelman College, where she majored in English and minored in secondary education. After graduating with honors, she attended Wellesley College for a 5th year of study in English. In 1971, she returned to her alma mater, Spelman College, and joined the English department. She has published a number of texts within African American and women's studies, which have been noted as seminal works by other scholars, including the first anthology on Black women's literature, Sturdy Black Bridges, Visions of Black Women in Literature, Double Day in 1980. She is the past president of the National Women's Studies Association and was recently elected to the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. So thank you so much for being with us today.
She sends her regrets. She's having Wi-Fi problems right now. She just messaged me. She's been having it throughout the session. We will circle back. Why don't we move to the next panelist and come back once we're able to fix the issues. Sorry.
Okay, so then I'd like to introduce Dr. Gelman. So let me go back to... So Dr. Emmeia Gelman is a scholar activist in queer and anti-racist movements. Her work has moved across communal and institutional spheres, including 25 years of collective direct action organizing and a decade as a policy strategist on labor, climate justice, and fiscal policy in New York. Emmeia's doctoral research is on neoconservatism and its reconstructions of civil rights and victims' discourse from the 1980s through 2016 to advance neocolonialism, Islamophobia, and anti-Blackness. Her current communal work is in NYC queer, Jewish, and public school communities. So thank you so much for being with us today. And I'd like to hand this to you. Here.
Thanks. I'm not a doctor yet, working on it. Don't think it matters, but I'm actually, I think I'm here both in my capacity as a researcher and also as a activist, particularly in Queers Against Israeli Apartheid in New York. So I'll just do the question that was put to some of us was, how have queers responded to white supremacy, anti-Blackness, anti-Muslim racism, Islamophobia, etc. And so I think the background on Queers Against Israeli Apartheid is part of that. And then I also want to just rep a little bit the research and political history that has grown out of that activism. So Queers Against Israeli Apartheid in New York City, which is one of at least 3 quayas that are separate, have been separate, was formed in 2011 by queer activists who had already been working on Palestine solidarity and came together because of a particular incident, sort of a somewhat common story of an institution canceling an event because it's related to Palestine. But in this case, there were queer politics involved in it, and it was a little more twisted. It was the New York City Queer Community Center, the LGBTQ Center, had been a meeting place for Siege Busters, which was working to raise money for the flotillas that were breaking the siege of Gaza. And of course, many people who were in Siege Busters were queer, because queers are throughout the Palestine Solidarity Movement, just as they are throughout and in leadership of other anti-racist movements that are not necessarily queer identified. And so the center shut down the event, and because they said it wasn't queer enough, in March 2011. And it turned out, of course, because queer politics are all family circles, that it was a single guy. He has many identities that became politicized, but I won't mention them except to say that he was a Russian-Israeli American living in New York, and he was sort of like a kingpin of gay entertainment and had lots of fancy, wealthy gay male friends in his party circuit who were also donors to the center. And he self-published a press release saying that the center was was anti-Semitic and should shut down this event. And so the center, being extremely sensitive to his social circle and also to the publicity around being called anti-Semitic, especially in New York City, shut down the event. And so Queers Against Israeli Apartheid formed to try and push back on that, not because we were particularly interested in the bureaucracy of the center, of the Queer Community Center, but because that is a site where queer identity is really produced, where groups meet and where the interests of queers are sort of enumerated, and where actually a ton of funding goes in support of queer communities. And here it was. Actually, they ultimately banned Queers Against Israeli Apartheid as well, and decided that they would not allow the word Palestine to be uttered in the center. And we did test that. There was a fundraising event for an independent movie where the organizers felt that they couldn't cancel the event, but they also wanted to be supportive of the protests. And so they allowed us to talk about it in the Q&A, and we were removed by center staff. So they definitely were enforcing that. There was a whole, the work involved a whole bunch of sort of public meetings and pushing back on the center and pushing back on the elected officials in New York who had created this narrative that you couldn't talk about Palestine without being anti-Semitic. And it turned out it was very integrated with queer politics as well, because the speaker of the city council was a very prominent lesbian, et cetera, et cetera. And the ban persisted and finally ended when there was a high profile piece of pushback. Sarah Schulman was trying to do a reading of her book, Israel, Palestine, and the Gay International. And they wouldn't let her, and it was a big enough stink that they were forced to withdraw the ban in very mushy terms, where they wanted to make sure that nobody uttered any words of bigotry, but they didn't say what would count as bigotry. So and Kwaya actually sort of wound down at that point, although the projects continue, and we reconvene when it seems useful to do so. But the thing that's actually, I think, interesting and important about it as a response is actually how much of left organizing in the US and in New York, and particularly in my world, was sort of trained and deepened by the work of queer Palestinian critique of pinkwashing organizing. In fact, of the idea of homonationalism, and the idea that identity politics really needed to be examined for its colonial content. I think those were lessons and discussions that came from Palestinian queers trying to talk to US queer organizers about how to do this work without being destructive and without replicating the structures that we said that we were fighting against. So I'll just say a little bit more about that. The activists who were involved in anti-pinkwashing work in New York, where it came out of other work. They had already been involved in anti-colonial and decolonial work, including, I'll just list some, actually there were not that many members, but it's a pretty rich array. So there were people who were working on opposing gentrification and building alternative modes of housing and community, on trans rights and actually trans world making, AIDS organizing, which has demanded a total rethinking of healthcare, opposing the religious right, and Irish anti-colonialism, both in the US and Ireland, as well as Palestine solidarity. So pinkwashing resonated with all of these other movements, and the lessons that came from Palestine and the thinking that came from Palestinian queer organizers, I think has continued to sort of inform that work. And I think it's worth talking about where we were when pinkwashing arrived as an issue. This is not my historical research, but my feeling about it is that we had had decades of really transformational work happening in queer communities. And, again, I'm centered in New York. I'm sorry if it seems like I can't see past there, but my world had been defined by ACT UP and the Lesbian Avengers and the Irish Lesbian and Gay Organization, which were doing direct action that really disrupted hugely powerful enterprises, from pharmaceutical companies to the Catholic Church. And it died. It had died because the gay marriage organizations built an NGO structure over our heads, which we later learned to call homo-nationalist and normative. And it brought in many conservative gay people, queer people, gay people, who were then available to endorse Islamophobic wars and domestic policing on behalf of queer communities. So the anti-pinkwashing work became a field in which queer resistance to those kinds of co-optations of queer identity became visible, and where simplified narratives of gay rights that had been sort of fed in to queer organizing for the whole decade of gay marriage work became visible. And that's why it was really important to fight at sites like the LGBT Center in New York, and also the National Gay and Lesbian Task Force, which ran a conference called Creating Change that sort of did the same kind of papering over of queer Palestinian demand. So that was sort of the story of that. And I don't know if I have really any minutes left, but I would like to just sort of point out, maybe for conversation later, that the ways that pinkwashing relies on stripping out the content of people's lives from identities. Like it casts Palestinians only as queer, and forgets about all of the other, or asks us to forget about all the other ways that people are identified, and it casts Israel as a sort of savior and asks us to forget about all of the violence and the repression that happens. That kind of single issue approach to protecting queers actually has much deeper roots in the US. My research is on hate crimes, and the way that the hate crimes movement was formed. And actually, I use a lot of Dean's work in my research. And two things are important to share about that. One is that hate crimes laws were advanced by the Anti-Defamation League, which is a Zionist organization. Its main project is Zionism. And it's not a coincidence that a narrative about care and protection that seeks to hide the power of the people who are calling for protection was created by a Zionist organization. And I think pinkwashing sort of replicates that now. And BDS is now called a hate movement. And there are many ways that they overlap together. And the second is that in the last couple of years, actually, the pinkwashing narrative, I think, has diminished, and it's been replaced by a focus on anti-Jewish hate crime, white nationalism, which is real, but it does the same work. I think some of the work that's been done by pinkwashing is now being done by the focus on hate crimes, and queers are actually, because of the anti-pinkwashing work that we've done, probably better positioned to resist that than most. And in fact, Jewish organizations, even Palestine sympathetic Jewish organizations, are having a hard time with that. So I'll leave it at that. And I really appreciate the opportunity to be part of this conversation. Looking forward to hearing the rest.
Thank you so much. So let me introduce the next speaker. And So let me introduce Dr. Dean Spade. Dean Spade has been working to build queer and trans liberation based in racial and economic justice for the past 2 decades. He's the author of Normal Life, Administrative Violence, Critical Trans Politics, and Limits of Law. The director of the documentary, he's also the director of the documentary Pinkwashing Exposed, Seattle Fights Back. And he's also the creator of the Mutual Aid Toolkit at bigdoorbrigade.com. His latest book, Mutual Aid, Building Solidarity During This Crisis and the Next, is forthcoming from Verso Press this month. So thank you so much, Dr. Dean.
Thank you. It's really such a treat to be part of this conversation. So many people who I've also had such meaningful learning collaborations with, and I can just feel all the history of all the things we've tried in the room of this conversation. And yeah, I'm gonna kind of pick up where Emmeia left off with a lot of the same themes. This question about like, what is the soil in U.S. queer politics that made pinkwashing such a thrive so much, unfortunately. So I wanted to just talk a little about that for people who maybe don't know as much about kind of what the divides that are really significant that Emmeia has touched on in queer politics in the U.S. And so I'm just going to kind of do like a overview from like, you know, very quick and dirty from up high. And I really wanted to tie it into some of the current uprising against anti-Black police violence and how we can understand the complex questions of solidarity and intersectionality and siloing that emerge in both these conversations and the overlaps. So, you know, a lot of people in the US think about, and I think maybe around the world, think about US queer politics as having this like really incendiary moment with Stonewall in 1969. Like that is like, you know, the annual Pride celebrations that happen not only in the US actually, but in many other places as well, commemorate the date or the end of June, usually the timing of the Stonewall Uprising, which was, of course, an uprising by working class queer and trans, multiracial group of working class queer and trans people at a bar against the police, who constantly harassed them and engaged in all kinds of violence and criminalization of those communities. And so maybe what often gets left out of that narrative is the fact that that uprising emerged in a context, of course, in the 1960s and 70s of a global uprising against colonialism. And domestically in the United States, a huge uprising happening against white supremacy with major riots and disruptions in every city in the United States every summer in the late 60s with this kind of very bold politics of Black power, of Puerto Rican liberation. I mean, many different anti-racist movements of the American Indian movement, and also this really vibrant feminist politics that was pushing back against patriarchy generally, but especially like family formation norms around sexuality, and also this huge anti-war movement against the war in Vietnam. And so there was this kind of like global moment happening, and then also the specifics of the domestic moment in the United States that was, why Stonewall happened, right? Because there was a very broad delegitimization of the police happening at the time, and of white supremacy, and of gender and family formation and sexual norms. And a lot of people who were resisting at Stonewall were also part of the Young Lords or other interventions happening in their city, in New York City, against police and against white supremacy and against war. And so that, after that, of course, there's a huge global backlash to that anti-colonial moment, and we get what we might call like neo-colonial or neoliberal politics and policies all over the place. And that looked like a lot of things in each of those movements I just named. And I'll just tell the sort of like queer trans story, because that's the one that, this event is all about, but we could tell parallel stories in a lot of different places. But basically, after that moment, the queer and trans movement roughly developed in kind of two different channels. One was a channel that continued to center racial and economic justice, opposition to US military imperialism and colonialism, kept centering feminism. That's the one you've probably never heard of. And then the other that we're all part of. And then the other one was, of course, the one that got all the money and all the billboards and all the TV shows, which was a kind of mostly, most funded, visible, white-led, lawyer-led organizations that had a platform that kind of had four main pieces. They still, these are still they're pretty much their framework, which is same-sex marriage, anti-discrimination laws that include gay people, and then later they sometimes added trans people, hate crime laws, which are laws that make it, that Emmeia was referring to, that make it you get more punishment if you hurt somebody because of their particular marginalized identity, and also they add a lot of money to the police systems to supposedly track and prosecute such crimes, and military participation, having gay and lesbian people, and then later discussion of trans people be able to participate in the U.S. military. So that package of reforms is the one that became if you ask average people in the United States, that's what they think gay politics is. That's what they think queer people want. And as I'm, maybe is obvious in, those of us who are in the other track who care about racial and economic justice and anti-militarism, feminism, we see those reforms as essentially they're reforms that affirm the existing oppressive systems by asking for participation in them. So advocacy for that kind of participation legitimizes those institutions. And part of the reason this is so important is because those institutions were attacked and delegitimized in that revolutionary moment in the 60s and 70s. And so they were not on steady ground. And the gay and lesbian rights framework actually became an important toehold for re-legitimizing them. And I'm going to say a little bit about each of those reforms to kind of frame that, right? So obviously, the U.S. military and U.S. military imperialism is always on shaky ground because it's the entire world is against it, except for a very small elite who benefit from it. And so many people are harmed by it, including people who are in the U.S. military, but also, of course, the whole world that experiences its weapons and its occupations and its unsavory relationships. And its pollution, it's the largest polluter in the world, the U.S. military. So to reframe from having a kind of general leftist and progressive agreement against war to having this narrative about people seeking a chance to be in the U.S. military. And if you look at what that advocacy looks like, it always looks like we deserve to be part of this dignified job, doing this important patriotic work. So to do that advocacy, you have to pretend that it's a good job and pretend that what it does is good, right? So it basically takes the romantic and caring progressive feelings we might have about this marginalized group and its struggle for freedom, and it pins those on something that needs good PR bad, right? Similarly with hate crimes laws, right? They make it seem as if queer and trans people want more access to police and prosecution powers, when in reality, police and prisons are the single biggest source of violence in the lives of queer and trans people. And anything you add to the prosecution power of the U.S. police and prison state just increases likelihood that more people of color will go to prison, more people with disabilities, all the people targeted by that system. Marriage, same thing, right? There's been all this feminist work to make it easier to get out of marriages, to make it easier to get a divorce, to expose that people's well-being shouldn't be distributed through marriage. It's messed up to distribute immigration rights through marriage or to distribute healthcare through marriage. All this work to dismantle marriage, and then you get this huge romantic love wins. Same-sex marriage makes a narrative that marriage is the right place for rights and responsibilities and is a dignifying force in our lives instead of a control strategy that's always been used for colonial and racial and gender purposes and capitalist purposes. And then anti-discrimination laws. And this one's big because there was that big lawsuit that was announced on my birthday this year that was says, oh, now gay and lesbian people have employment discrimination rights. And the thing that's wild about that is, of course, that those rights haven't worked for any of the groups that are covered by them. The racial wealth divide has only drastically expanded in the U.S. during the time when racism has purportedly been illegal in employment and public accommodations. So they're just it's a cover story for the realities of a brutally racist apartheid system. And I don't have any expectations that having discrimination against queer and trans people be illegal will transform what's actually happening for queer and trans people's survival in prisons and immigration facilities and in kind of the brutal poverty that is the reality for most queer and trans people and worsens as the economic divide at all levels gets worse in the U.S. So in the US, what pinkwashing looks like these days is like having let's have gay cops. Let's have a gay mayor who deploys those gay cops into your neighborhood and into your protests. Let's have gay soldiers or trans soldiers, let's have gay people be able to adopt out of a brutally racist child welfare system. Like that's what it looks like here. And meanwhile, while all of that apparatus has been happening and all of that, all of those lies have been being told, of course, leftist, anti-war, anti-colonial, anti-imperial, anti-racist, feminist, queer, and trans work has also been developing. Like there's nothing new about any of that. That's been happening the whole time, but just, not on TV as much, except for when we're being arrested or whatever, occasionally. But what that looks like, what that work has looked like is direct support to all people struggling in that growing imprisonment and policing apparatus, in those immigration proceedings, in poverty, facing all of those systems, and a lot of work opposing the growth of all those systems of border enforcement, police, prisons, et cetera, and a lot of participation in anti-war struggles and support in struggles for people all over the world suffering from U.S. military imperialism or from the U.S. funding the militarism and occupation they're facing. And there's been a ton of queer and trans leadership, of course, in the prison abolition movement in the United States and the border abolition movement and other real leftist movements. So that work has been going and developing analysis the whole time. And I share all of this because I think that understanding that divide and that creation of a neoliberal, very conservative, pro-police, pro-war, pro-capitalist gay politics is like the soil that made the pinkwashing strategy so fertile, right? It made it so that you could make an argument that Israel is a good place because it's gay friendly, because there's gay people in the military. Like that requires such an evacuation of everything leftist or progressive or liberatory from the vision of queer and trans politics. And that work was being done by like gay whiteness here and like gay wealth and like, and that, yeah. So those, I really think that's part of what allowed the pinkwashing narrative to make, to have a toehold and become an international story about how good countries have this or that gay policies, and that makes them progressive regardless of what actually that country is or does in any other ways. So I just want to finish by saying, this moment that we're in now, I think is a really powerful and complex one for thinking about these kind of questions, right? Like we're obviously facing like severe climate crisis, economic crisis, this pandemic, and the ongoing disaster of living in a police state and a prison nation here in the US, and also that we've exported that so many places in the world, similar systems of policing and imprisonment and surveillance and border control. And we're kind of living in nonstop disaster. I don't think that's going to stop for the rest of my life. And at the same time, we're seeing, at least here, like a pretty wild uprising against anti-Black racism and against policing and criminalization here this summer in the US. And it's still really unclear what that uprising will yield, because the systems are really good at having counter moves to try to basically engage in PR moves to defend their systems. So they're like, oh, you want to defund the police? How about if instead we just have more Black cops or just a couple gay cops? Like they're making the same moves they make, trying in every way to retain this really massive apparatus of harm and violence. And I think because of these moments where uprising is real, where disaster is real, where disruption is happening in the systems for multiple levels, and where activists are trying to cultivate that disruption towards building a world we want to live in, it's more essential than ever to have really good political discernment, because of the pressure to have our issues become siloed, because of the pressure to sell each other out, because of the pressure, because of the level of punishment that happens for people who dare to show solidarity with one another or try to build a complex movement that actually sees the connections between all of our struggles for liberation. And so, I think that work is ongoing and requires, really requires all of us, and we're in a very pivotal moment for that work as we all face kind of existential questions due to the real nightmare that these centuries of capitalism and white supremacy have created for us. So I'm really honored to be together with all of you in this conversation, whose work has really cultivated my discernment and is where I look to for support in developing that. And yeah, I'm grateful to the organizers.
Sorry, thank you so much. So I'm wondering, so we don't, I'm just wondering if we should ask Dr. Shafie next. I remember she has to leave. Okay, so I think I will just move on, hoping that she can come back on with us. And okay, so let me introduce. Okay, so let me introduce Dr. Heike Schotten. Heike Schotten is Associate Professor of Political Science at the University of Massachusetts, Boston. Heike Schotten is Associate Professor of Political Science at the University of Massachusetts, Boston, where she teaches political theory, feminist theory, and queer theory. She's a member of the organizing collective of the U.S. campaign for academic and cultural boycotts of Israel, and the author of Queer Terror, Life, Death, and Desire in the Settler Colony, published by Columbia University Press in 2018. So thank you so much for being with us. I'll give this to you.
Great, thanks. Thanks so much. Is it working? Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Is it good? Fantastic. Thanks. Thank you so much, Rabab and Tomomi, for organizing this webinar. And it's really amazing to be here with this amazing group of people from whom I have learned a tremendous amount. And I think everyone's remarks so far are really useful. I'm not gonna replicate them because they're so useful. I'm gonna sort of add my own weird idiosyncratic contribution to the conversation, which as a theorist is gonna be a little bit theoretical, so it'll be simultaneously broader, but also a little bit more narrow. I want to talk a little bit about pinkwashing as an ideology and where it sort of fits in terms of thinking about the ideology of the right and how it is that the right. That's what I want to think about, and that's what I want to talk about today. Ideology, although is not the materiality of politics, it is nevertheless inextricable from politics, and we have to pay attention to it. And I think we have to take our cues from it in some ways in how we respond to attacks on us and our movements for liberation and for justice. So I'm just going to make three points, and then I'm going to wrap it up and turn it over to everyone else. The first thing that I want to say about pinkwashing is that in the realm of ideology, it's not exceptional, right? It's really important, and it's not exceptional. That it's part and parcel of a particular tactic or strategy of the right that has been ongoing, perhaps as long as there have been forces of reaction, and that strategy or tactic is to appropriate our languages, our visions, and our ways of speaking and describing the world, our ways of talking about freedom and liberation and emancipation and justice and collectivity, right? What the right knows is that those visions are compelling, that those visions resonate with people, and that those are things that people want. And so what the right has, as I said, what the right has historically done, insofar as there's been a right, is tried to take on that language and those imaginaries for themselves and portray or present themselves as engaging in liberatory work, which we know that they are not, right? And so when it comes to pinkwashing, and this is the first point that I want to make, right? When it comes to pinkwashing, we need to pay really close attention to it. And it is important, but we need to not exceptionalize it. It's part and parcel of this very standard right-wing strategy or tactic. And I think, yeah, so we're going to err in exceptionalizing it, and we're going to err in not making connections with other sorts of right-wing and oppressive attacks on our people and our movements. And I think we would also make a mistake to think that it has necessarily anything to do with LGBTQ people when it does not. And I think Haneen did a really nice job explaining that again. I feel like she must be exhausted from saying this over and over again, right? Pinkwashing is about colonization, right? Pure and simple. That's what it's about. And the fact that LGBTQ people, just like Black and brown people or Indigenous people or disabled people, can be mobilized to somehow serve, provide a progressive veneer for otherwise deeply oppressive and damaging and harmful and deadly projects should not cause us to somehow champion LGBTQIA people ourselves as somehow inherently transgressive or disruptive of power or radical. So I think that's really important. And so that's just the first point that I want to make, that pinkwashing is actually not exceptional. And it's important, but not exceptional in the realm of ideology. The sort of second thing I wanted to talk about is the question of why pinkwashing works, why it's so effective. In addition to the historical pieces that Dean and Emmeia and Haneen provided, which I think are really important and crucial parts of the story. Ideology also has psychic resonances and has other ways of entrenching themselves and becoming popular and persuading us that they actually have the true story, right? And of course, one way is, as I said, by appropriating how it is the left speaks about freedom and emancipation. But another way that it does it, and in other parts of my work, I talk about this in terms of morality or moralism, and I'm going to skip that for now. But another way that this is used really effectively by the right is to talk about, basically to talk about or imply existential threat. Okay, what does that mean? It means that what happens is, first, they flip the script and they say that those who are doing the oppressing are actually being oppressed. Who are they being oppressed by? They're being oppressed by these marginalized, powerless people, right? Which allows them to cast the oppressed in all sorts of degrading and derogatory forms and language, justify the torture, imprisonment, surveillance, disappearance, and murder of them, and present themselves as harmless, as innocent, as victims. If this sounds like Zionism, it should, because that is it's a hallmark of Zionism. It's a hallmark of settler colonial ideology, which is threatened by an irrational and indecipherable savage menace that will destroy, right, civilization as we know it. It's a hallmark of really standard forms of queerphobia, fearing queer people's threats and attacks and dissolution on anything from gender to kinship to the family to, harming and destroying children. So that flipping of the script and presenting the oppressor as the oppressed is crucial. Why does it work? It works on the one hand, right, because those languages are compelling, but it works also because it mobilizes the fear of existential threat on the wrong side, right? But it says that those savages threatening us, right, portend the destruction of the known world. Queer people or queer forms of community and queer forms of life threaten the dissolution of the sanctity of the social order or culture or kinship. Palestinians are terrorists who threaten to, who harm and destroy innocent people. It's more than just. What am I trying to get at? I'm trying to get at that this is not just a way of differentiating people, hierarchizing people, but it's a way of actually constituting people as worthless populations that in themselves threaten to destroy what exists. They themselves become existential threats. They themselves portend the destruction, the annihilation of what exists, right? So it's by means of existential threat, you get that's where you get the derogatory language that I don't want to even necessarily repeat, right? But this is where you get discussions of looting. This is where you get discussions of savagery. This is where you get discussions of terrorism. And it is where the negative and abjectionary connotations of the word queer come from, is this threat posed ostensibly by people or groups of people whose very existence threatens the annihilation of those, dispersing or dispensing this ideology. Of course, it's a lie, right? This is upside down. But the threat is so powerful and is so compelling that even our allies and friends, right, sign up for it. And this is how you get people who ostensibly are on our side who are condemning so-called violent protesters, right, or who insist that not all Muslims are extremists, right, or who sanitize queer relations by openly nobly declaring that love is love. So when it comes to fighting pinkwashing, or any ideological project advanced by the right that attempts to erase hierarchy by presenting oppressors as victims and as innocent, I think that we need to go directly to the source, and we need to refuse to engage in those terms altogether, because those terms were never neutral to begin with, right? Those terms were from the beginning ideological. They were from the beginning targeted political interventions meant to produce people and populations that can be disposed of, that can be incarcerated, that can be surveilled, that can be tortured, that can be disappeared, that can be left to die, if not outright murdered. So that's sort of the second piece. And the last thing that I sort of wanted to say was to talk about how it is that that queers, that BIPOC communities, feminist communities, the way in which people have responded to this kind of attack, and the ways that we can continue to respond to these kinds of attacks. I think we have to do all of the things that we have done and are already doing. I can't wait to read Dean's book on mutual aid. But I think we have to take that ideology very seriously, in the sense that we need to not take it seriously at all. We need to not give it any kind of legitimacy whatsoever. And I think that takes a bunch of different forms, and it has taken a bunch of different forms. I think those forms are threefold. Okay, so the first is sort of, when confronted with these ideological attacks, is to agree, right? Is to agree to them and to say, yes, indeed, I'm queer. That's the one that has proven most mainstream, most generalizable. Whether or not it poses that kind of existential threat anymore to declare one's queerness, I mean, remains to be seen, right? But to declare that one is precisely the existential threat, that ideology sort of tries to enlist us in, as a way of calling its bluff, right? A, as a way of calling its bluff, and B, by also making clear that, in fact, yes, that the worlds that we want to build do require destruction, and they require destruction not of the world in general, but of white supremacist worlds, of settler worlds, of imperial worlds, of homophobic and patriarchal worlds. And I know there's been a lot in all the discussions about abolition of late, there's been a lot of conversation about how abolition is not simply or only a destructive project, but also a constructive and a building project. And that's 100% true. And also, this is our own shyness, I think, in being clear that, yes, abolition will require destruction. And if that means, if that makes us savage, if that makes us terrorists, if that makes us queers, if that makes us looters, then yeah, I mean, I guess that's what we are. I guess that's in fact what we want. So I think that's the first kind of response to that ideological ambit. A second response would be ridicule, which I think of as sort of a sort of hallmark of queer resistance. It's just laughing at people when they say things like that. Sanctimony, the easiest and best way of piercing and undermining sanctimony is ridicule. And queers, this is sort of what's at the root of all sorts of queer pleasures of drag and camp and perversity and pride and that is what disrupts, the disruption of sanctimony in favor of perversity, pleasure, and riotous laughter is pretty effective and distinctly queer. And I would say third, we refuse this ideology by doing what it is that we do already and are doing every day, are doing right now, which is we exist and we continue to build our own worlds, communities, and human relationships as a celebration of exactly who and what we are in terms that can't be countenanced by that ideology, because it exceeds it, because it's not even in the same universe, it's not even in the same world. I think these are survival strategies that are ongoing, and I think they're some of the many meanings of the expression that existence is resistance, and I think in some sense we owe some of this even to our comrade who's on this webinar right now. 30 years ago, Judith Butler taught us, right, that these sorts of strategies are what reveal the hegemonic social order itself as the ruse, right, as itself the punisher, as itself the regime of punitive idealizations of whiteness, of kinship, of sex and gender and sexuality that tries to foist its failures onto us. And in our refusal of that, right, that's what will make clear its oppression. So yeah, I'm really glad to be here, and I'm grateful for the conversation. I hope that's useful, and I'm gonna mute my mic now.
Thank you very much. So I guess I'm afraid. So I guess we will do the discussion now. I'm sorry, I'm just reading the chat section. Dr. Abdulhadi, so we have a few questions that we would like to start with, and I think first I'd like to actually ask Dr. Abdulhadi about a little bit of like a historical background for us who are new to this conversation, perhaps, and I'm just wondering if you could talk about this whole the issue about queer liberation march and the Zionist attack on it, and how all these threats that the panelists have been talking about were connected in that particular event, and then maybe we can take up other questions from there.
First, I want to first start by thanking everybody who participated. This is really amazing. I feel like being so selfish and having everybody to ourselves to kind of have these conversations again and again with each other. The Queer Liberation March, actually the banner that we use for the flyer here, is from the Queer Liberation March on June 30th, 2019, which was the 50th anniversary of the Stonewall Uprising. And this was something that I don't see people's faces. Why is only my faces on the screen? And I know this is something that Emmeia and other people in the Queers Against Israeli Apartheid in New York did. And we marched together. I took it as, I just posted it on my Facebook page, and then we shared it with everybody. And then there were the Zionist attacks that started happening. And I think the reason actually I found it very empowering for me, because it reminded me of back when I was organizing in New York, and we were marching, and we were all marching together, organizing with each other, challenging each other actually to really uphold the indivisibility of justice. Secondly, this Queer Liberation March in particular actually said this was anti-corporate. It was an alternative march, and I hate to say alternative because it always feels that it is sort of like complete, not the authentic thing, and so on, which is a very big discussion. But I think it was contesting. It was a subaltern space and it included people who were originally part of the Queer Liberation March. It said that we don't want any corporate sponsorship, which is, everybody was speaking about that today. And I think Dean in particular emphasized a lot on it. It said no cops can march unless they don't come into their uniform, so as not to lend legitimacy to the policing mechanisms and actually uphold what people have been talking about all along, the abolition of the police, the abolition of prisons, and so on. It was really, I mean, to me, I felt I was among comrades and allies and community, and I posted it, and then as a result of it, I started receiving so many hate attacks, and actually not just hate, individual hate, but actually over 80 Zionist organizations organized with each other and contested and demanded that California State University and San Francisco State University punish me for putting up hate on my Facebook page. And of course, they didn't say what was what, they just say hate. So if you don't have time, you don't click to see what it was all about. And they continued saying that I'm actually misusing the Facebook page, the unofficial one of the AMED Studies, on which we post everything else, and challenged, demanded that the university do so. And as a result of that, immediately short thereafter, actually, Brooke Goldstein of the Lawfare Project got on Fox and Friends and spread tons of lies, including the fact that they have an ongoing lawsuit against me. I said, no, you actually don't. We defeated you big time. And so it was, and Fox and Fred continued the lie. And then afterwards, I received death threat, threatening me for what I'm doing and talking about the Christian Zionism and things of the sort. And they were very much connected with each other. This is continuing to happen again and again. And so there is a very big issue. And this is why we have the title of Pinkwashing now. And it's a very, very big issue that brings up many of the discussions that people have speaking about the whole question of what do we think about equity versus really kind of like, you know, anti-poverty, struggle against neoliberalism, against skepticism, against corporate power, which we are engaging in now with the silencing of the Zoom webinar. It brings in the whole question of, I think, really important respectability. And I put it in parentheses, how that gets constructed in order to discipline people to behave in a certain way. What are the resources that we have that should be available for education, for scholarship, for our own teaching and scholarship and advocacy? And how do we bring the three things together? While a lot of the times it's actually what we do gets constructed as outside of the academic world. That's not actually as respectable as what we do theorizing inside the academic world. So these are some of the issues that I would kind of like for us to discuss and think about them and so on. Another question, which maybe we can talk about later, how are these things Islamophobic? Not only how are they Orientalist, how are they racist, how are they colonial, a part of colonial, queer and feminist work and so on, but also how are they Islamophobic? And why is it that things that happen against Arabs, Muslims and Palestinians are constantly held as such a low bar that actually do not get challenged as other things that get challenged and so on? So I'm not suggesting a formula of Oppression Olympics. I'm thinking that how do we do that? How do we argue? And I know that some like Haneen, for example, and Ghadir, it's really late for you and so on. So maybe we can just have a discussion where this was in the plan to kind of like have everybody weigh in and discuss each other, just have a conversation with each other before we move on to the next round. I think that would be okay. Yeah, exactly, Judith. Yeah, that's what we were actually thinking, because it's really late there, and so we thought they need some. It's the problem with the timing. You know, it's like how early can you do it? You can do it 6 in the morning in the Pacific Standard Time in order for you to be able to. I mean, and we also want everybody to be in the same classroom. We want people to be together. We want to be able to discuss with our students and our colleagues and so on. So I think it would be really great if we kind of like be mindful about the time and so on, and have Haneen and Ghadir. Maybe we switch the order now. We go with Haneen first and Ghadir, and then we continue. And I know Leila is back with her broken foot. So we can actually have, so if we can have Haneen and Ghadir, and then we can have, you know, the panelists weigh in, and we thought maybe kind of like just going around, people discuss with each other, and then we can open it up to other questions. So you can weigh in on anything you'd like. We're very open. We really want it to be kind of like a conversation. Why don't you go ahead?
Thank you, Rabab. Thank you, everyone. I don't remember the last time I was awake in this hour, so that's a new challenge. Maybe I'll just engage with, though I don't get fully the question, maybe with the notion of pain that was discussed, like the queer pain and how it's used as like part of like pinkwashing. And I think maybe a bit of like perspective in the last like 2 years of queer activism in Palestine that I think Ghadir started to mention, but with the increased like visibility of the queer movement became a lot of like violence, social violence that we have been facing in the last 2 years, partly more from family violence. And we had a big incident 2 years ago in August 2019 of a stabbing of a youth queer who was actually run away from their family to a shelter, LGBT youth shelter in Tel Aviv, which sparked a lot of like an intense social discussions around queer violence, and in a way, I think materialized the pain of queer experience in Palestine, and this like conflict, constant conflict between like individuals and their families specifically, and how central that pain is in the experience of queer youth, which pushed basically a lot of civil society organization in Palestine, in the West Bank, and in 48 and East Jerusalem to speak publicly and clearly about refusing, resisting this violence. And later on, a couple of months after, the Palestinian Authority police spokesperson issued a statement basically banning Al-Qaus activities in the West Bank and inviting citizens to participate in the persecution of queer activists and activists from Al-Qaus and report of any suspicious queer activities in the West Bank, which again, a lot of like civil society in Palestine stood behind Al-Qaus, and the PA and the police, the Palestinian Authority police deleted or canceled that statement. Which is really interesting. So we could see like the visibility of queer struggle brought a lot of like violence, but it's also pushed civil society. But, you know, change doesn't happen only in this direction, but also Israeli LGBT groups and Israeli organization and Israeli activists who is involved in pinkwashing also using this to increase pinkwashing, right? So using the pain, the stories, even I will just maybe share an anecdote, like an Israeli organization organized a discussion about how the Palestinian Authority is banning Al-Qaus activities, and they invited us if we want to like attend, right? Or New Israel Fund funding a big LGBT Israeli organization to open a range of services for LGBT queers, because there is this idea now with queer visibility in Palestine and social violence that also a lot of queer youth will come to Israel, or this is also an opportunity for like increased pinkwashing internally. So I really like, I appreciate all of the intervention, and I relate to a lot of these analyses. I think what I was bringing to this conversation is also seeing how pinkwashing operates inside. And I think while festivals will end and campaigns will vanish, or I don't know, filmmakers will change, a lot of these Israeli LGBT organizations and Israeli campaigns are establishing more and more kind of connection and outreach programs to LGBT Palestinian youth. And it's going to be a really challenging times moving forward to balance between also anti-pinkwashing and social violence, and maybe by in a way making accessible the dialectic relationship between both. So I just wanted to just put this in the context of what's happening in the queer movement in Palestine. And I'm sorry I have to leave before hearing everyone else engaging in this amazing discussion.
You can always hear it on Facebook. It's going to be on Facebook. It's going to be available, memorialized forever and ever. So
Thank you,
if
everyone.
there is ever and ever. But anyway, تصبح على خير. Thank you so much
Bye
for
bye.
joining us. All right, yalla, we'll be with you in the future. Ghadir.
About painful experiences, and perhaps for me, one of the most painful experience that myself and many others in Palestine and outside of Palestine had to endure throughout this past year is the tragic death of Palestinian queer artist and dancer Ayman Shafie, who drowned in one of the shores near Haifa. And the Israeli authorities did not invest any efforts to look for him for more than 4 days. We saw Palestinians trying to make any effort to find Ayman Shafie, only to be found 5 days after he drowned. And later on, there were a lot of incitement around what type of proper burial to live because of his sexual identity. As a mother, I felt that this could be one of the most painful years for Palestinian mothers. It was painful to see how sometimes queer people also pay a price in their death. I think that it was then that not tens or hundreds, but thousands of Palestinians from all over Palestine came to pay tribute to Ayman Shafie in his hometown village in northern Palestine. And for me to be there among the crowd, even heartbroken and shattered, gave me a lot of strength to see that there's a birth of this movement that we can be for and against anything, but we can never give up our humanity. And I think in those difficult moments and challenging moments for our queer movement, it was inspiring to see how many of us insisted to take a stance against the oppression, whether it was institutional oppression or societal oppression or religious oppression or any form of oppression, and to stand together, united for our rights, our individual rights, for justice and freedom.
Thank you, Ghadir. Do you need to go to sleep too? I'm sure. I'm not putting you on the spot. Whatever you want to decide is okay.
I also wanted to add that it was very inspiring to hear everyone, and of course to see everyone again. I'm very, very happy to see you, even in my small iPad screen. It's very empowering to see how closely you are all have been following up on Palestine and Palestinian queers. In the past decade, 10 years of your work and time and effort has been invested in order to bring our voices, not just to the academia, but also to activism and the circles that you have been efficiently and effectively involved with. It's very inspiring to be sitting here in my house and just feel the overwhelming energy of each and every one of you. I'm so grateful to be among you, and perhaps this gives me more hope that change will come, maybe not be born of our pain and misery, but from the hope of having people who are committed to justice for everyone, wherever you sit. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ghadir. My God, I don't know why I shut myself up. Thank you so much, Ghadir. Good night. It's been really lovely. Thank you for joining us. By the way, we continue, love you. We continue to try to bring Beverly on because her internet is completely shut. So she's been trying to come in and out. But perhaps we can have a discussion to kind of some of the issues that you all brought in. And, I'm sure also Tomomi has questions. The students, Salim and Anais, who are with us. Salim is the graduate student in anthropology at UCLA. Anais is at Wellesley College, who is the president of the Arab Women Association there, as well as Students for Justice in Palestine. So you think about, don't feel on the spot. It's up to you if you would like to ask questions.
Rabab,
We want to make sure. Naam, Leila.
Habibti, I think that my leg is going to fall off.
Okay. So, all right. So you're going to leave.
I just before the next round of comments, I just wanted to say thank you so much for the opportunity to participate in the way that I like to, which is performatively. So, yeah, and just really, I think, thank you, Judith. So I think that honestly, the work is, I'm so heartened by this transnational work, and I think that I'm hearing and seeing more and more transnationally, and the deepening and deepening of awareness around BDS and engagement. And I mean, that's why they're so flipped out, is because it's working. And so it's like, why would you be flipped out if it wasn't working? So anyway, I wanted to leave with gratitude and thanks to not just the organizers, but for all of your voices over the years. Has been such a pleasure. So I wish you all the best, and we will continue in the struggle. All right.
Thank you.
Take good care. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Not just
so, oh my God, here, Anais, thank you so much. Anais and Salim are with us. I actually wanted to just like maybe start the first round of discussion about bringing the issues that you brought together. I'm not going to talk about performativity and performance because also Leila is not. but I actually want to bring in the whole question about civility, the question about civility, civilization, and the ways in which queer struggle gets marked as the symbol and the signifying of civility and civilization, and connected a little bit to the ways and you all spoke about this, connected in the ways in which actually also feminist struggle also gets constructed at that. Both what Haneen was speaking about, the Palestinian Authority, and kind of like they backed off and so on. Part of it also because they don't want to have a bad reputation, but also I think, I mean, in my own mother's view, you tell me if I'm wrong, is that it also shows the possibility for actually making more gains if you had a fluidity of context rather than have a very solid state that has all these policing mechanisms that are so rigidified, that are so strict, that actually say this is who can enter, this is who cannot enter. And I want to go back to the whole question of how does this link up in what's going on now? Because it is kind of like if you have post 9/11 2001, it was always said that if you are a woman, if you are a queer, if you are a particular way and so on, you actually get a chance to be able to get an exit visa. You get a chance to get a grant at the university, you get a grant, a fellowship, and so on. And there is a ways in which people who are kind of like gender and sexually oppressed gets constructed as marked as symbols of what civilization might be, and also as symbols of the oppression, the whole question of saving brown people, brown women. So I wanted us to just go into that, because there is one thing about the high visibility that you spoke about, Judith. You spoke about what happens about that and so on, and Haneen and Ghadir and Ghaif and all of them. Everybody says, we don't just want you to have solidarity with Palestinian queers. We want you to have solidarity with the struggle for justice for Palestine. At the same time, there is also a struggle that we actually really need to kind of like be talking about. And then I think it was Emmeia who spoke about the 13th Street and the whole, how it was happening. Every one of you spoke about that. Dean, you spoke about that, and the whole policing and white supremacy. Heike, you spoke about how does this work in particular place. All of you spoke about that. And I know Tomomi speak about that all the time, because Tomomi is very active in the Comfort Women Justice Coalition, in Zanyeki Korean spaces, and so on. So there is this whole question of the respectability. What gets passed as something acceptable and what doesn't get acceptable? Whose voices get to be heard? Who's the good Arab? Who's the good Muslim? Who's the good Palestinian? Who's the bad one? And so on. So I was just wondering, this actually might be really good, because it is something that actually gets raised a lot. And we always is sort of like we dance around it. I'm going to pass it over to Tomomi also first, and then maybe people can take around and have a discussion about it.
I'd
You're
like to
muted.
talk about this a little bit, and then I'd like to jump in later. So, like, if any of you could go ahead and respond to Dr. Abdulhadi's question.
Well, I will say this, if you don't mind. Let's remember that this ideological construction is contradictory, right? So on the one hand, Israeli society will immediately identify women and queers and maybe even their trans folk as in need of acknowledgement or advancement, or as signs of their democracy and civilizational status or claim. At the same time, the state of Israel is being actively supported with huge financial contributions by right-wing evangelicals who are attacking the notion of gender, that are attacking trans people and their rights to lay claim to their legal identity, that are against gay marriage, that are seeking to destroy reproductive freedoms for all childbearing people. And I think that we have to see that they ally with those who also attack gender non-conforming peoples and women and all of these social movements at the same, and Israel benefits from that at the same time that it will take its token Palestinian or its festival, which shows this or that film and says, look how inclusive we are. So I think what we really need to do is to criticize that theatrical assertion of inclusion as a cover, not just for its massive human rights assaults on Palestinian people, although surely that has been our argument for a very long time, and not just for the settler colonial structure that makes sense of or is being exemplified in those so-called human rights violations, but also attacking those very groups or being complicitous with the most powerful anti-gender platforms and projects in the world. So we must be able to identify and expose those contradictions.
Thank you, Judith. Okay, who would like to go next?
I'll add something to that. Okay. I just want to say too, I really appreciate that point, because I think one of the things that happens is people think that if a country or a state or a city or whatever, or an institution like your local police force are making some kind of declaration about queer and trans people, that it means that makes a difference for queer and trans people's lives, instead of that it's just PR. So it's like the same, and I think, I always think about Dylan Rodriguez, prison abolitionist scholar here in the US, who talks about how, at the LAPD, the Los Angeles Police Department, was like one of the most infamous sites of racist violence in the United States, that kind of a lot of eyes are watching. In the 1960s and 70s, people were really seeing how violent it was. And then they just started recruiting cops of color. But didn't change what the LAPD does. So it's like, even if you get a gay cop or you get trans people in your military, it doesn't doesn't mean that that there's actual well-being for queer and trans people. And I think that there's because of the mythologies of rights, there's just this slippage. People just think that if rights have been declared somewhere or representation has been declared somewhere, that people's well-being increases. But what we're seeing is as all these mechanisms of extraction and militarization and policing and surveillance grow, even if they slap different flags on themselves, they say they've got a rainbow flag, or they say they're for people of color, it's actually worsening conditions for those populations, even while it expands in our names. And so I just think that's such a key piece that Judith was just saying about that contradiction. And I just also, you started, Rabab, by talking about discourses of civility and civilization. And I think it's just so important. I'm here on Duwamish land in Washington State, and it's so important for us all to just track, of course, you know, I learned this from all of you, that every colonial project, what it does is it goes in and says, the colonized people, they do gender and sexuality wrong. And that's why we have to come here and dominate them and change and force our sexuality and gender norms and our family formation norms onto them. And so whether that's here in Washington with Europeans arriving and saying, you know, burning the longhouses of the indigenous people and saying that they cannot live in these communal ways that they live, and they need to take on European gender norms, and putting, you know, indigenous children into Indian boarding schools where they would be punished for expressing indigenous genders and forced to express European gender norms, or whether that's the United States having a broader project and other colonial powers of saying that Palestinians do gender and sexuality wrong and need to be rescued by Israel or rescued by US or European gender norms, or whether, you know, this has happened in so many different places. It's a key feature of colonization. I can give examples in Hawaii. I mean, so many places. And this move is something that is all about a discourse of civilization that justifies colonialism and imperialism. And it's just like alive and well. It's just a different European or US gender sexuality norm than the one that was maybe enforced, you know, in 1850 here or in 1650 in Virginia or whatever. But it's still the same move, even if what it's saying it is like, you know, now we're going to accuse the people we want to colonize as being sexist or homophobic. It's the same story of it being like basically rescuing women or women and queers as the reason for colonization and occupation and domination. And it's also happens here in the United States. Like Black communities and Latinx communities are portrayed as more homophobic or more sexist consistently to justify policing, to justify all kinds of state violence. And so I just think it's like I just appreciate that you brought up that notion of civility and civilization. Where I thought you were going to go with that was like the ways that we're all policed as being insufficiently civil in our discourse about, as soon as we talk about you know, Palestine or any of the other topics that are not allowed.
I was, but then I got diverted to the other discussion, and I thought we can come back to it too. So I know that Judith so maybe Heike and Emmeia, you haven't spoken?
I was just going to say there's no civilization without the savage. I even hate saying the word out loud because it feels like such a slur, right? But there's in order to have civilization, you have to have this abjected other, right? That exists, in my opinion, and as an existential threat to settler colonialism, to systems of hierarchy and domination that are themselves eliminatory, right? But cast anyone not part of their civilization as a threat to it, and as savage, as outside the constraints of reason, beyond the norms of social life, inherently violent, inherently destructive, when of course they're the ones committing genocide.
I would just add, I think the understanding the roots of this in colonialism and understanding it as a colonial project is essential. But I also think it's really important to understand it as a post-war project about modernity. So like we were talking earlier and hearing earlier about the tension between anti-pinkwashing as a conversation about like what's happening for Palestinians and Palestinian queers. And then on the other hand, there's a sort of tendency to make pinkwashing about the US. And even though I think it's really important to be careful about that and center it on Palestinian queers, we're also talking about the way a narrative operates in the US. I mean, it's particularly appealing to the US because we have constructed this particular narrative of rights. So I think it's important to, like, even the sort of Orientalist East-West discourse is also about modernity and who's modern and who shows they're modern by honoring a certain set of rights. And the reason, the thing that really like comes to the fore when I think about that is that as these stories about what a modern state does in terms of rights and egalitarianism, et cetera, start coming out of World War II, you actually see the development of a knowledge industry that's seeding those ideas about rights. Like people didn't just adopt them. I mean, there was some of that, but they come out of media and they come out of an enormous investment in curriculum and advertising, like subway placards that, you know, encourage people to not discriminate in order to like really be American and like fight the enemy, because the enemy discriminates and Americans don't discriminate. So if you're discriminating, you're, you know, dinging the war effort. And it's a huge knowledge industry that now actually predominates. I mean, it's not, we may have adopted many of those ideas in our political culture, but the knowledge is still being produced by organizations. There are, you know, there's school training, there's anti-bias training for policing, and it all reinforces these same ideas that a certain right needs to be protected, and anyone who doesn't protect it is like sort of worthy of violence and destruction, and also that we shouldn't look at any of the other ways that people are that people have power, even if they're sort of claiming a victim status. And just Rabab is asking me to talk about the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League, which I need no prompting. Sometimes I'm worried I talk too much about it, but the Anti-Defamation League is the subject of my research. It is the primary provider of anti-bias training to schools and police forces and security forces. And the anti-bias training that it does, like, people seek it out because they're like, oh, we recognize that there's implicit bias, like a university security officer, you know, shot a Black student who was on campus because they had implicit bias. We need to be trained out of this. But what those trainings do is they sort of replace all of the discourse that's coming out of the communities that are experiencing violence that says, like, it's actually not about whether somebody is biased. It's about whether someone has power, and about the way that that people who are marginalized or marked as you know, not quite up to the standards of modern society, middle class proper society, get marked for violence. And so that industry, just to sort of get off my history horse here for a minute, that industry actually comes out of World War II, like post-war projects, and those organizations are still running things. So they developed their politics, their sort of centrist politics in the aftermath of World War II, and it's still the same organizations creating the knowledge and the narrative. So for communities to try and break out of that, now we're stuck having to say things like, we opposing hate crimes, which is a very difficult position to be in. And that's actually that's why anti-pinkwashing is so difficult sometimes, because we get accused of saying that we get accused of not caring about queers or not caring about violence against queers. Sorry to go on so long. There's a lot there. It's the history of colonialism and the post-war history, I think, both intertwine very important.
I'm going to pass it on, but that's what I was trying to kind of like bring up, because one of the issues, and you asked about that, Dean, is actually we've been from, like, we have also Stephen Salaita, but we also have the whole construction of what civility is all about, and what constitutes civility and what doesn't, and what constitutes civilization. I think the way Heike also spoke about this is kind of like, you have to have called the savage in order for you to have the clash of civilization or civilization and so on. And that has been actually a lot used against us also, by always asking us to be civil, that if you're actually demanding your right, you're considered combative. If you're actually saying that this is not okay and so on, people will say, why don't you just calm down? Why don't you just relax? So there is actually, and I think I want to link it up to what Haneen was talking about, and the question that Stefan asked, but the whole question of pain and the question of anger and the question of emotions as well, that also get distilled, not only about the place of emotions, the rationality versus rational, but also who gets to be angry and who gets to be validated for their tears and that, but who doesn't actually, is not even allowed to be angry, to be expressive and so on. And the ways in which people actually also police themselves as a result of the overall policing of society. So I kind of like, I mean, part of the reason we did this is because we also really want to connect the issues together. We want to connect gender and sexual justice. We want to connect the whole question of white supremacy, policing, discipline. We want to bring these issues together. We want to bring them back to also our own institutions, because at the end of the day, people always act as if they are out there. And this is not the people who are here on the panel. but it gets constructed as if it's out there. And if you are part of civil society and the civilized society and so on, you will behave in a particular way. So there are particular rules that actually also act as disciplinary mechanisms that silence and censor and tell you not to do certain things. So I was hoping maybe, because also, you know, Tomomi and I are very much, Dr. Kinukawa and I have been very much sort of like subjected to this recently, but we're not the only ones, you know, our students, and I'm talking about everybody, our colleagues, communities, all of us who are doing this work constantly. So I think I want us to kind of like tease this out a little bit. And I was wondering maybe Salima and Luis also have something to kind of like weigh in here. If you're not, okay, again.
Can I jump in just very briefly before like we got Nice and Salim? And so just I'm still like processing everything, so like just very preliminary thoughts, but I just wanted to add that like I'm thinking about Japanese imperialism and like in it's Zionism was like something to emulate for many like Japanese colonizers and throughout the 20th century. And also like I'm doing this activism around so-called comfort women justice and like the Japanese military sexual slavery system from 1930s to 1945. And so like we have, like Japan has its own historical revisionists, like we call them denialists, who like erase the history and attacks the survivors who are speaking up about the crime. And they actually, like one of the diehard, denialist actually is a very much pro-Israel. He runs pro-Israel Zionist organization in Tokyo, that's in Japan. And so like, and then like their strategies are very similar to each other in many ways. Like they use education, like, and then and also like they go beyond the borders, right? Like, and so they use their embassies, like cultural programs and so forth to kind of regulate the ways in which global citizenry is shaped. And so like how like, you know, so like I feel like they deny the kind of the grassroots radical connections that we are making here. And then they have their own version of like how like a global community needs to be produced. And like a bit very much neoliberal, very much liberal citizens. And I think that kind of goes like ties back to what Rabab was saying, like Dr. Abdulhadi was saying about this, like a civilization, who is civilized. And so I'm just thinking that it's, I mean, I'd like to add this whole non-Western, so-called non-Western imperialism in this conversation, and also like this whole very violent erasure of the survivors and victims of the Japanese military sexual slavery system. And that's a gendered and racialized erasure that I think has a deep connection to the gendered and like a racialized erasure of Palestine queer people and other Palestine people. I mean, like, I'm not saying it's the same, and no, that's not like, what I'm saying, but I think there's this global racial connection that needs to be analyzed. And that way, I think many of, and all of you are saying like how we actually connect our movements to, and also I think, I think I am learning a lot from Palestine queer movements and like those strategies, like, like pinkwashing as a colonial violence, that is like really like relevant when I do like comfort women justice, work. And so I think, that's where I am. I'm sorry, like I'm still very much inarticulate, but I really appreciated all the learning, learning from all of you. So that's all.
I want to add something because the connections you guys are making are so incredibly useful, and both what you just said about like the use of educational frameworks, and then also what Rabab said about like bringing this back to our own campuses or our own institutions. It just made me think about we haven't talked about this yet, the Deadly Exchange campaign, which is a campaign of Jewish Voice for Peace to try to stop U.S. law enforcement. So like different police forces, like some police here in Seattle and part of the Seattle Police Department have like gone on these trainings funded by organizations like the ADL to train in Israel with Israeli military and police and to exchange kind of like the worst possible ideas that are going to hurt our communities the most, about surveillance and racist policing and militarism. And so, you know, GAVP has led this campaign in consultation with a lot of, you know, movements against policing and movements for Palestinian liberation, et cetera, to have us all do these local campaigns in our own towns to try to ban our police from going on these trips and stop this. And to me, this kind of work is so essential, because it's like, and it's similarly like, my students right now are working on a campaign to look at how our own criminal justice department here at our private university like does all of this collaboration with the Seattle Police Department and props up these terrible surveys that comes out with that basically skew these terrible racist ideas about crime in Seattle. Like, how can we look at our own, wherever I am, whether it's my city's police department or my own university, like I'm involved in things that have their hands in this harmful work. And one of the things I love about the Deadly Exchange campaign is that it really tries to internationalize. Like in the US, there's kind of a problem where the politics become really domestic, and it can become like, I think in general, US population is the least aware of the world and is really encouraged to not think about things outside US borders. And people have been discouraged from internationalist frameworks in our politics that have been very powerful and threatening at different points in US activist history. And so this campaign asks us to link our opposition to immigration enforcement and to policing and police violence to the struggle for Palestinian liberation and the kinds of border and policing and militarism being faced by Palestinians. And I think that's very, very important and really, really bold. Finally, I just want to tell a brief story from that Deadly Exchange campaign, which I think ties together some of the things that Emmeia is thinking about and that we were talking about, which is that as part of the Deadly Exchange campaign here in Seattle, I went to meet with, so the Seattle city created a community policing commission, which is like a typical thing that cities do to try to pretend that they're going to, work on making the police more fair. But usually these commissions have no power and can't actually change anything about the policing. And it just kind of expands the ways people are being paid to keep policing the same. But I went to meet with the leaders there to be like, hey, I wonder if anybody in that commission would be interested in backing up our campaign to stop the Seattle Police Department from going and training in Israel. And of course, I was told, like, no way, that has nothing to do with Seattle. With like, nobody's going to care about that. That's somewhere else. That's far away. That's irrelevant. I got those messages of anti-internationalism. But also, when I explained that the ADL was one of the groups that pays for this, people in the United States, they perceive the ADL to be like a Jewish civil rights group. They don't think of it as like a pro-police, pro-colonial group. Thankfully, Emmeia's work will help us keep uncovering them. But what I was told was, oh, you know what? Actually, last year, our city's Office of Civil Rights tried to develop an anti-racist training for our police, and this was a couple of years ago that I had the conversation. And the police wouldn't agree to the content of it, so instead, the ADL offered a training about police bias, which didn't mention the words race or racism at all. And so, to me, to see like the ADL is sitting there with a training on a platter that the city of Seattle can just pluck when there's a battle happening between the Office of Civil Rights, which wants an anti-racist training, and the police department, which doesn't want to deal with a training that actually has content that would be threatening to the racism of our police. And then here's the ADL, a private organization, offering a training that doesn't mention racism at all, that's supposedly about bias. And so that story was so wild to me, and so really showed also the role of nonprofits and of like this sort of fake civil rights structure in collaborating with maintaining white supremacy in our institutions and maintaining this deep alignment, actually, of the city of Seattle with the state of Israel, which is visible in all kinds of ways that they're aware of and ones that they're not when they accept this ADL training.
I actually would like maybe Emmeia to actually also build on this, because it's very interesting. I mean, the Anti-Defamation League has historically, its history in the 60s and so on was very much involved in spying against all sorts of, but it's also, and it continues to do that. So I was just wondering, maybe kind of like, and I know each one of you raised this, Heike also raised this, and Emmeia raised this. I hope it's okay that I'm using first names. But I was actually thinking about, one is the whole question of kind of constructing things as quote unquote foreign. So they will get taken out of the equation of thinking about justice. So it becomes domestic and foreign. Actually, so that's the whole question of kind of like thinking about what does it mean when we actually build frameworks around justice. Secondly, is the role of Anti-Defamation League And then thirdly, I think Emmeia also, and I think maybe also Heike can weigh on this. Emmeia specifically spoke about how difficult it is. And I think part of the problem, I mean, definitely this is part of the problem for like a Palestinian scholar like myself, to actually speak about it, because there is also the attack against, then you get labeled as anti-Semitic, despite the fact that a lot, okay, maybe majority of the people who are actually weighing in and organizing today, as you mentioned, Jewish Voice for Peace and many other Jewish organizations, historically, there has been many more kind of responses to anti-Semitism way before Zionism came. And I always, say Zionism is a passing phenomenon, they get very upset with me. But I'm thinking about, like, how do we then even kind of like articulate things more, a little bit more around that, to kind of continue challenging anti-Semitism, white supremacy, Nazism, all the hateful ideology, anti-Blackness, Islamophobia, and so on and so forth. At the same time, we're also actually saying that you don't, this is what you are doing, you're actually hiding behind a very important struggle and so on, but you're actually lending support for Israel. So I was wondering if you can actually speak about these two points.
Sure. Well, Dean, that's an amazing story about the Seattle police. It all ties in, but I actually have been researching a similar instance that happened in 1980, 1981, when after the Greensboro massacre, in which the KKK murdered anti-Klan protesters, that the National Anti-Klan Network put together a national curriculum on white nationalism, but not just on white nationalism, also on its connections to the state. Very tame. And they got the National Education Association, which is the teachers union, 2 million teachers around then, to adopt it for implementation across the country. And the ADL came in and said, no, you can't have this curriculum because it implicates the state. It's anti-American. And they offered instead, they said, we'll come up with another one. And they did. And now the ADL is a partner in probably every school district in the country, providing anti-bias training that uses, it's called a pyramid of hate, in which racism really doesn't play a role. Power doesn't play a role. It's all bias. So this idea of having an organization that has the moral authority to say, well, these are the people who deserve rights, and and we're the ones who are going to tell you how to get there, and displaces organizing and community voices that actually call for them and try and build them, and replaces them instead with avenues to maintain white supremacy, is a very old and ongoing pattern. And to the question of how, yes, that happens. And then, as I mentioned, that the ADL was very involved in hate crimes legislation, and also in sort of defining what hate crimes are and aren't. And there was a hearing in 1986, a congressional hearing. There had actually been a whole series of hearings on different kinds of violence, different forms of violence. There was violence against Black people, which, because there was from both police and white nationalists, enormous amounts of violence. There was violence against Native, Indigenous people, all kinds of violence. And there was one hearing in 1986 on violence against Arab and Muslim people. And the AJC, the American Jewish Committee, which was a partner of the ADL, testified in that, as sort of an expert witness in that hearing, that the violence that Arab Americans and Muslims were experiencing was not hate violence, that it was political, because it was Zionists, the Jewish Defense League, probably not always shown, but Zionists who were attacking, murdering, burning out of their homes Arab and Muslim folks who and on a political basis. And so they're saying it's not hate violence, it's political. And therefore, if people would just stop being, if people would stop opposing Israel, then they would no longer be subjects of violence. So that was sort of the framing that they brought to the discussion of hate crimes. So it's been consistent over time, and the ADL continues to do that, to charge everyone who opposes a particular set of politics anti-Semitic, and then also to claim the space of saying that we're the ones who are defending against Islamophobia. So yes, it's a longstanding project, and it's persisted. The one difference is that prior to 9/11-ish, the Anti-Defamation League was, I believe, largely understood as a conservative organization. And since 9/11 and since this sort of normalization of war and the attachment of liberal values to US wars, including protecting queers and protecting women, the ADL has been perceived as a progressive organization and become a partner of many movements. The question of how do we get out of this, which Rabab asked, and I think is really important, it's very, very hard to get organizations and people to refuse the invitation to be protected by hate crimes laws. So, for example, after the last attack, there was an attack on some Jewish men in upstate New York, and the Anti-Defamation League organized a no hate rally, and everybody wanted to participate because everyone wanted to oppose that incident. So it's very hard, but the hope is that withdrawing support generally from organizations like the Anti-Defamation League will be effective. So there is now a campaign called Drop the ADL, droptheadl.org, that has many anti-racist organizations signed on to say, actually, the ADL talks about hate, but is undermining our movements in other ways. So I think it's actually just a withdrawing from those from those alliances and building others is the way to get out of it. I think fighting against it is it's like if you're being pulled in a riptide, you can't swim towards shore, you have to swim sideways. I think that's how it has to go.
Thank you. Heike?
Yeah, thanks for that, Emmeia. That was fantastic. I just want to add, in response to your question, Rabab, I mean, it's so hard to speak, you're saying, right, without risking the charges of being anti-Semitic, or as in the case of Stephen Saletta, being uncivil, or as is the case, since 9/11, being branded as a terrorist. That is how those discourses work. That is the point. The point is to make it impossible to speak, except as a Zionist or an anti-Semite, as civil or uncivil, as an American or a terrorist. Like that's why it's hard to speak. It's hard to speak also because you're being targeted by an extremely well-funded, coordinated, massive right-wing campaign that has enormous financial power, right? And it's also because the ideological trick that is performed is to present anti-colonial speech, Palestinian liberation speech, emancipatory speech, anti-racist speech, anti-white supremacist speech, or conduct as threats, as existential threats on innocent, victimized people who are in fact the ones doing the silencing and doing the oppressing. And the way you respond is A, by throwing as much sunlight as you can, which is what the Drop the ADL report does, beautifully, right? You throw sunlight on where all this stuff is coming from, on who's paying for it, and who's behind it. And then with regard to the actual ideology, I think we really need to not be afraid to, as I said, right? We need to not be afraid of outright ridiculing it. And we need to not be afraid of embracing its terms, which is not taking it seriously by embracing its terms, which is riskier depending on who you are and where you're positioned, right? But in my opinion, this is what tenure is for. Maybe this is also what whiteness is for. This is what privilege is for, is to say, you bet. You wanna have a webinar on Leila Khaled? Guess what? We're all gonna have webinars on Leila Khaled, right? Because we're not afraid of this word terrorism. You want to call us terrorists? Fine, we're terrorists. Right? Like I think we get ourselves in trouble when we avoid or we sidestep, or we want to say, when we somehow accept the threat, the ultimatum, the fear mongering that's in those ideological traps. When we say, oh no, I mean, we condemn violence, right? This nobody died in the hijackings, in Leila Khaled's plane hijackings, right? It's not the issue. It's not the issue. What's the issue? The issue is colonization and anti-colonial resistance. That's the issue. And that's the conversation that we need to be having, which they're trying to make impossible, both financially and ideologically.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm passing it over to Tomomi because I'm hearing a lot of echo because I'm getting captioning, so it's not really very clear. So I'm passing it over to Tomomi, and I think Salim wanted to say something, and Anais is passing today. So, but with huge thanks to Salim and Anais and being so amazingly brilliant, not only in making this happen, but also in actually conceptualizing. And I just want to say that we do have a next webinar on November 1st, which will be the 50th anniversary of the 1970 statement published in the New York Times of Black radicals on Palestine. So that's going to be the 50th anniversary. And we actually have a few people, including the editor of the statement, Sam Anderson, Fran Beal, Phil Hutchins, who was the chair of SNCC, and Robert Leroy, who actually was one of the people who was involved. So they're going to all come and basically close the year on that day. So we hope that everybody will join us, and we will figure out how we're going to do the webinar and the technical stuff. So back to you, Tomomi and Salim. And I think Salim is going to close, right?
Well, I think, yeah, I just, all I can say is just thank you so much for everything today. And it's, yeah, we've been kind of struggling through everything for this webinar series. And so your words, your work, your life, everything was so powerful. And so I really appreciated it. So thanks so much. And
yeah, hi.
Salim.
So we have like 8 minutes left, and I wanted to say thank you. I wanted to say that, you know, we're all coming at this event with different hats. One of the hats that I'm coming in is with the student organizer. At UCLA, I'm a member of Graduate Students for Justice in Palestine. We have 6 different classes at San Francisco State University that will be watching this event and taking copious notes and asked to be in conversation and respond to it. We have a lot of different youth organizers. We have a lot of different folks who are involved in various kind of student-based student organizing and social movements. And my question is, we have focused a lot on talking about understanding kind of the context of what is it that the challenges that globally we're fighting for, and what Dr. Abdulhadi has termed the indivisibility of justice, right? And fighting for justice holistically for all of us, right? And we've also talked a lot about kind of the history of those who have come before us and those who are acting in the continued struggle now. And I've also heard that there's a lot of kind of the process, right? The process of liberation and the process of justice. And my question was to us is what do you say to those? What do you say to those in the youth and student organizing now that are watching this right now? Is what's your advice to them? What's your what do you say to them to, you know, continue in on that, you know, as we've said, that long durée, right, of organizing? There's folks coming, yeah. So I mean that if you want to take it on.
I'll start. I just want to say, you know, the thing I say to my own students and other students I meet, it's just like the power of student organizing cannot be underestimated. You know, I think that people are told to think that school is something you're buying or something that you have to do to become professional and get a job or something that is just practice for life. But actually, the campaigns happening on campuses have always been immensely disruptive, immensely powerful. Young people are the people who are most likely to take the biggest risks in all of our societies and are usually at the front end of every struggle. So I just think, and I think, you know, there's always ways in which we've lived through a period where they've tried to depoliticize campuses, and they've tried to stop college students from organizing with K through 12 students, and they've tried to stop people from understanding their universities as a target, and they've tried to make our student groups into just like cultural groups that sell a certain kind of food, not like political groups that like say cops off campus, and stop researching militarism and adding to that, but you know, whatever. So I really encourage my students to like study student organizing. And right now it's actually easier than ever to like watch amazing documentaries. Like listen, there's a really great podcast about the strike at San Francisco State. There's so many great, easy, fun things to listen to and engage with. And then it's also so much easier to follow other people's struggles. Like I've been following all the Cops Off Campus stuff on Twitter. You know, like it's just, it's a really great time to connect campuses across a state or across a region or across the world. It's a really great time to find out about the history of people who came before you and what they tried. And they tried some bold stuff that we've been told we can't try, and it's not true. And so I just think feeling how important that space is. And the other thing I always tell my student activist friends is like, treat each other like you're going to know each other for the rest of your lives, because you will, right? Like, I mean, I met Emmeia in grassroots activism when I was probably less than 20, and here we are still in space together. So it actually matters that we've always treated each other with care, even though we've been in groups that had all kinds of drama. You know, like, how can we treat everybody like we want to keep them? Because of course, when you're in activism, you're going to have conflict, you're going to have learning, but like the bottom line is like, pretend that your life depends on these people, even if they annoy you. Like, even if you don't like them, can you love them? You know, and that can be hard to do in activism. And I really think it's make or break, especially right now because of government infiltration in our groups. Like, we actually have to really treat each other with care and love, even if it's hard sometimes.
That's some pretty good advice. That's hard to add to that, but I would just say, don't be afraid, and we got your back. But you need to, step up, be the leadership. Yeah, and we got you.
Maya?
But I am always more impressed looking backward at what the younger versions of our movements accomplished, right? With all the however messy and ridiculous they were, and you know, however ill-advised something might have been. Like, we really made a dent by being bold and not worrying about what seemed possible. We were just, you know, and especially queer organizing. The lessons of queer organizing are just to like decide what you want and demand it, and not be worried about what seems like it might be palatable to the person who's holding the power. I'm with you guys.
Tomomi?
I'm not sure if this answers your question, Sabine, but I think, our collaboration, I think, done itself has been so, how do you say? I mean, I just learned it immensely from that. And so I think I really appreciate it to all the team members, Dr. Abdulhadi and Salim and Alice, and I think, we will move on. I mean, keep fighting. So that's all I wanted to say.
Just going to say one thing is that I think I really agree that we have been there before and we will continue, and there is continuity. And I want to really, and I know each person here has your own activist, quote unquote, credentials, if you will. I hate that word because it's too neoliberal, but your own place and so on. And I always think whenever I want to think about social movements, I think about what Todd Gitlin said, which was the other side of the organizing at San Francisco State. Yes, Heike. He said, oh, you're going to grow up and then you're going to stop. And this is the guy who actually presumably was involved in the free speech movement, was involved in the whole world is watching and so on. And I always say, it's like, if this is it, I don't want to ever grow up. Because I think the whole question of justice, the whole question of commitment, the whole question of us being mentored by people before us, we stood on other people's shoulders. And now it is like some of us, we pass on, we support and so on. And I think it's really, really important. I think what you said is the whole question of the love for community. And I'm not talking about some fluffy, immaterial thing. I'm talking about really having each other's back, making sure we don't throw each other under the bus, making sure we are there for each other, especially when we are at our most vulnerable. It's very easy when we have support, when we're, winning awards or whatever and so on. Everybody is there to congratulate. But like I always remember in Palestinian context, is that always people say, whenever I used to go to Palestine, my mom will always say, this is who died, this is who died, this is who died. And I say, what about, these people who had children? What about? She says, no. Most important thing is you actually go with people who are the most, when things are really toughest. And the other thing I wanted to say is I think you mentioned that the sun, Heike, and sun is very important, metaphor in Palestine. So there is the gate of the sun. There is the enemy of the sun. There is always the sun that actually shines and actually says to you, no, you can try to hide all you want, But the sun is here. The sun is exposing. So whether it is a real sun, daylight, and so on, or it is actually metaphorical, it's you make things public. You kind of hold people accountable. You're transparent. You work with each other, and this is how we all survive. That's the only way we can actually survive, especially in tough times. Also and so I think this is really, really important for all of us, and it's just the appreciative labor of all of you coming here and actually join us and being willing to go through difficult times of all this, not jumping through checkpoints on the webinar and so on. It's like really, really amazing, all the support and so on. I feel really, really honored and blessed to be with everybody who's here, and thank everybody for their labor and for you.
Thank you, everybody. We are going to end the broadcast now, and we'll stay in touch. Thank you.